Hello. So I'm starting actually more or less on time this time around for Distance 14, where I finally returned to actually doing live streams. And it wouldn't be this without hearing people calling me a boomer in the comment section, so I guess people are hearing me. I don't know, you guys will have to tell me. So yes, presumably people are hearing me, and I hear a question where Catholic Wench is. Catholic Wench is not in this country. Sadly, she's in Canada. And am I is my sound not coming through here? Well, we'll have to hear back from people. I'll keep on going because it's saying comment section. So I guess people are hearing me. We're getting some feedback. Sorry about that. Um, yeah. So I just wanted to do a quick distance. It's infernally hot here in my apartment, and what better time to do a live stream than when things are finally starting to cool down around here. And I can hopefully answer people's questions, get back into the mode of actually making videos, and then see what comes of it. So, for people who are wondering where I went, if I died or not, no, I didn't. I kind of got obsessed with making this response video to a left YouTuber called Ben Burgess, and every time I made the video, I hated what I had made, and so I remade it. And so at the end of the whole process, I had essentially three videos. So as a result, I just strung them together into one giant response, which is kind of schizophrenic, but we'll see what comes out of it. I don't really want to engage with Ben Burgess anymore on Twitter. I find it to be horribly unproductive. Uh, I don't know exactly if he's trying to get my goat or not, but all I know is that it just causes a lot more heat than light. I know Adam Friended has talked with him a bunch, and he is a left wing YouTuber, a professional that's reaching out to us. So I guess, like I said in the video, we should be happy just because a noble of the current order deigned to talk to us. But at the same time, we'll see what eventually comes out of it. As usual, I'm going to use this time to answer questions, and then we'll go over whatever else comes out of it. Maybe we can watch some videos and comment on them if people want to do that. But as always, I'm not going to be able to see a question unless it's actually tagged at me. So, oh, is my voice too loud? This might be a little bit better here. So okay, I turn myself down a little bit, so hopefully people can still hear me. Um, Other than that, it could be. I mean, there's something else that's competing with this sound, so it more, for all we know, when I turn on an audio, it's gonna be it's gonna be worse because that's gonna get boomed through. But I'll try to match it as well as I can from the OBS control panel. So I see some questions. How many refugee feet does it? Okay, never mind. I'm not answering that question. What are your thoughts on Bart Ehrman's New Testament scholarship? He's the guy that he's that guy that thinks that he's the super progressive guy, right? I'd have to revisit it. I didn't make. He was really popular right when I converted to Catholicism, and I did not. I listened to him, and I more or less thought that he was someone who was whole hog on the progressive bandwagon, and he wasn't taking the analysis of the history seriously. But I might be thinking of somebody else, so please don't quote me. If this is not the person I'm thinking of, then I don't know who you're talking about. But I seem to remember him as being someone sort of akin to the Jesus seminar. How would you define a reactionary? Okay, sorry. Super chat, and there's a few super chats that came on before the stream started. I'll answer them towards the end. Thank you very much for your contributions. So Red USA for $2 says, "How would you define a reactionary?" That's easy. A reactionary is somebody who is skeptical of the core concepts and political feasibility of early and mid Enlightenment concepts. In many ways, I would consider Friedrich Nietzsche, to be a reactionary, but I would also obviously the quintessential reactionary would be Joseph de Maistre, who was an early critic, or not really an early critic of the Enlightenment, but a critic of the Enlightenment who wrote during the Enlightenment. And there are a whole series of Catholic intellectuals that wrote in a reactionary mode against Enlightenment concepts. Now, it's not that I'm entire, and this is why I always say I'm reactionary sympathetic. It's not that I think that the Enlightenment's all bad. It just, we're in this matrix of Enlightenment ideas, and these assumptions that we've made for hundreds of years are starting to not apply anymore. And so we're constantly hitting the wall of these Enlightenment ideas, and they don't work anymore, because these ideas were all developed during a time when European ideas and culture were so dominant that if every single European nation had a rule or a regulation or a way we did things, it could be correctly assumed to be universal, because the people who weren't doing it would adopt it because Europe had power. But now we're getting to the mode where Europe is no longer going to be in power anymore. Or European peoples are no longer going to be in power in the United States, and a lot of these Enlightenment assumptions are going to start failing. And so for this reason, I think looking back into reactionary ideas is very, very important. Bjark Erickson, thank you very much. DKK $20. Great talking to you on the Canada Society. Oh, well, you were there? Well, it was very nice to meet you, Björk. Is it Bjark? I'm sorry, I'm really bad with Swedish names. Is it Swedish or Icelandic? But anyway, very nice meeting you, though. I have very much neglected my responsibilities for the Canada Society. I want to get back in on that. Today has just been me trying to, well, as the stream title suggests, get back in the saddle. Loved your video. Okay, Principal Dingell says, loved your video, keep up the great work. Well, thanks. Again, I thought that video was a huge mess. It's like cooking up a souffle that flops. You're like, this thing is a unmitigated mess, but I've been working on it, so I guess we're gonna eat it for dinner. I'm glad. Oftentimes souffles are like that too. They explode, but they're still just as good when they explode as when they puff up all nice as you get them in restaurants. So thanks. I'm glad people enjoyed it. I am going to try to never do something like that again. Took up way too much of my time, and it's like I was motivated by anger, because something about Dr. Ben Burgess really gets on my nerves, and I speculated about that in the actual video I made. But it's like I couldn't stop working on this stupid video, and there really wasn't anything that I hadn't said before in it. Hopefully it's said in an interesting new way, but who cares? I mean, maybe not, right? I really doubt Ben Burgess is going to watch it all the way through. But that's not really pertinent to the point. Pragmatic Culture for $5 says, there's lots of anime that could be considered reactionary. Embroke the medium. Embrace the medium, Boomer Dave. Well, I used to, but I used to be, I'm a 90s kid. I used to be an anime fan. It's just, it's strange how the genre hasn't come forward, and I still haven't really figured out why it just spawned all of everyone who's been really into anime just got sucked into this identitarian left sort of stuff. I never fully was able to explain the phenomenon, but it is what it is. So thank you very much, Pragmatic Culture. Dreadnought for $20. Wow, thanks a lot. Distributus, thanks for your comments on Protestantism last stream and your tweet back today. I got really hot under the non-Roman collar. Was going to argue and then research the subject. I'm scheduling RCA classes tomorrow. Well, I'm glad that I could lead you to Catholicism. I have a lot of respect for Protestantism. I think it's a good. I mean, I just think it's dead. I think it's dying. I think in the 1920s, and I'm blanking on the conference name, there was a big, the mainline Protestant groups basically got together and said, we don't care about our theological differences anymore. And at that point, Protestantism was basically over, and we had these two branches, the evangelical and the mainline, and I don't think either of them are very sustainable. But it's not. I don't think people are going to stop being Lutherans, but I think that the difference between Lutherans and Catholics are going to become less meaningful. And I think that people are going to embrace the general idea that Christians have to have a temporal form of political arrangement that is more formalized than just like the communion of all believers. I don't think that's a sustainable concept, but we'll see. Dave the Librarian for $2 says, will Computer Dave be a recurring character? I don't know. Did you guys like Computer Dave? I mean, it was better than me dressed up in some other costume like ContraPoints does it. I like the idea of doing a dialogue back and forth, but the issue always is it's hard because you can speak very sincerely off the cuff like I'm doing right now, but obviously I flub a lot of words because that's who I am. But once you, in order to do a dialogue back and forth with yourself, you have to script it. And then immediately it's less like you're speaking off the cuff poetically and more like you're reading off of a script. And it's hard to capture even the original sincerity that you were feeling when you wrote down the lines to begin with. So I was a little bit worried that wouldn't come through, and it probably didn't. I rewatched and was like, man, I feel like I'm reading from a script, and indeed I was, even though if I had spoken it when I had written it, I probably would have seemed much more natural. But that's something, and I get this sense with ContraPoints too. I mean, people say that they're very sincere, but I don't really get that vibe from them. They always seem really stilted, and I know that's sort of a shtick and part of the gay camp sort of deal, but I don't know. It's just it's just funny. Justin Matthews for $1, just a pure contribution. Thank you very much. And then we have Red USA for $2. Bausch debate was bad. Don't talk to that guy again. That's, it's an interesting. So Bausch is like this. He's this bread tuber that just like badgers people. He's definitely from like this shitbag left tradition, and I'm not so sure. I think this is going to become more and more prominent. I think the left doesn't really have good answers, but if they badger their opponents, then their fans can just go like, oh, Distributus was owned by Bausch because he was on, and then Bausch called him racist. Huh, he'll never recover from that. I don't know. It's just, I know this is going to be popular because it will sell well. Because left-wing views are just things that are genuinely compelling to believe if you're quite young. And so it's something to consider. Man, it is really hot in here. I wonder why the air conditioning isn't working. Well, the show must go on. The distributist Bart Ehrman has a PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary. He seems like a centrist. Well, yeah. I don't think he's far left. His scholarship just seemed really, really suspect. It seemed kind of like Obama-style theology. So, I don't know. Maybe I can, so we'll do some more question and answers and then see if we can go to a video or something. I was initially thinking of just doing the question and answer series with my face, but I have not gotten very much sleep, and it would not be a pretty sight. So Alexander Dresna for $5 Canadian. The third act was fantastic. I hope you do more of it. It was reminiscent of Mouthy Buddha. Do more. Well, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. The Hooster for $5. Would you go on Friended's live stream again in the future? Yeah, I really like Friended. I think he's very honest. He's very interested in ideas, and I think that's something that we need to value. And that's I'm thinking of opening a window. People like Friended and Sam Harris, they play a very invaluable role, and Sargon to a certain extent too. They play a very valuable role in our community because very few people start out with some kind of tradition that can take them forward, and that's something that I guess can't come to them as a Roman Catholic. That puts people off. I say I'm a Roman Catholic here in secular California. A lot of people, I mean, it's a scary thing for some people. Religion is scary, but having people who are genuine seekers, and Friended certainly in that group, and Sargon to a lesser extent, but still there, uh, it allows sort of a journey to take place where you can provide insight and wisdom to people who maybe are at a different place than you are, but are much more aligned to other people who are listening to you. Guys, I need to open a window. I'll be back in like 5 seconds. All right, sorry for that, guys. Hopefully this works a little bit better. Uh, okay. Do 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 do. Um, Ben Bassett for $2 Australian asks, any thoughts on the Game of Thrones season finale? Well, I'd already given up hope on Game of Thrones last season, and I was manifestly inside a mode of decline for the last 3 or 4 years, ever since they basically ran out of book material. But they consistently had like interesting things in it until season 7 came along, and the stupidity they had in the show just skyrocketed. People started teleporting around Westeros. Characters that we were told were smart were doing things that were stupid, that were more stupid than anything any ordinary fan could think up. Sort of the number one example of this was Littlefinger's death. It's just, you could imagine 1,000 ways that he could talk himself out of that situation, and he just does the stupidest thing ever. And it's not clear that it seemed like they're just tying up ends, and then sure enough, we had the disaster that was what was the season 8. Uh, I don't know. I mean, it's just so. This is the thing. I need to do a video on Game of Thrones, and I will do a video on it. But I'm not going to do a video about why it was bad, because it's just so obvious it was bad. It was so. I mean, what's the problem with Game of Thrones? Oh, well, they didn't care about the ending. They didn't foreshadow any of the events that tied off any of the main plot lines. They just made random shit happen so that they could get rid of characters, and so that they could get to the point where they could put a period at the end. And nothing ultimately meant anything after things were said and done. Life just went on. There was no catharsis. There was no overarching message. And this is something that everyone's pointed out. Anyone, and speaking of Friended, his I think Stitch is the senior partner in that partnership, but Stitch from Friended and Stitch did a take on Game of Thrones where he rewrote Game of Thrones last few episodes and showed how they could do it better. And basically anyone could do that. Any fan board would have given you a better ending than you would have seen than the show writers wrote. And it's not HBO's fault. HBO is offering them extra episodes. They just wanted to get done with this so they could get on to bigger things. And the bigger things they're getting onto is the Star Wars franchise. What I want Game of Thrones to kill ultimately is the golden age of television. I think that we've gotten to this pattern before where it's like, we're just stringing you along with Mystery Box. We're giving you all of these events that really, really hype up this mystery box. And in order to go forward in the story, you have to keep on watching. And there's going to be some catharsis and meaning at the end, but at the end there really isn't, because modern man doesn't believe in meaning or catharsis or anything else like that. So how could there be? And this is something with Game of Thrones that I think eventually killed it. But I think it's going to be, people are going to see this pattern again and again, and they're going to, I don't want to get into any new TV series. I don't want to start watching. I started watching Man in the High Castle, and then I'm like, this is just going to get, after the first season, I was saying to myself, this is just going to become like an analogy for Trump. It's going to get super political, and then it's just going to play up spectacle again and again. And it's going to keep on going, and in the end, it's not going to have a very interesting conclusion. The most interesting thing about Man in the High Castle was that, in many ways, the Axis victory, Nazi-occupied America, had these elements that were almost more wholesome than the Allied victory historical version of America. And so the audience felt genuinely challenged by interacting with the Overkompenführer, the Rufus Sewell character, who's a really upstanding dad, but he's a Nazi. And that was interesting, but no one would ever, we're not allowed to have interesting conversations that entertain heresies in that direction. So why would I keep on watching? It's just going to be Nazis bad, we're the resistance, people power, oh, X character died that you thought wouldn't die. It's just, I don't know, I can do without that. Absolutely. Dreadnought for $5. Loved it. Video. I know you want to have charity, but have you considered that some of them just want to do murder-suicide on the human race? Oh, okay, so this is about sort of the left tube. What I want to know is, I want to know, honestly, what Ben Burgess thinks his relationship is with the people he's supposedly helping or not helping. And this might help me answer some questions, because I think it's really obvious that a lot of people on the socialist side, they're either people who want to grab the big bags and get their $1,000 per month or $2,000 a month, or however much the socialist is promising them per month, to essentially get paid for a living and then just do their own thing. Or they have some sort of toy soldier view of the human race where they're moving people around like pawns, and or they have some kind of social justice warrior mentality where they think they're going to be the saviors of are people still hearing me? I think, no, hold on a second here. Yeah, people are hearing me. Someone said I'm muted. Okay, or so to continue on, just I always get kind of terrified by that. But they have a social justice warrior mentality that says that they're going to be the saviors of the human race, and I want to know actually what they love. I mean, does Ben Burgess, what does he imagine his children looking back on? Like, what does he imagine his children's struggles are going to look like? Is he going to install like fully automated luxury gay-based communism and then everyone's going to live happily ever after? Does he think that's realistic? I mean, I don't know. And will this institution of socialism remove any realistic struggle? Is it just a way to... The problem is it seems that there's a certain apocalyptic dimension to how these people think about things. All problems ultimately... There's very few problems that don't track back to capitalism, ultimately. And so it seems that it's not so much a problem we're solving, it's all problems we're solving. And that really makes me suspicious. Charlemagne, for $5, we should have a chat soon about my recent reconversion to Christianity. Oh, you reconverted to Christianity? Well, that's amazing. I would love to have that conversation. Although I have to say, because I'm really bashful about promising things, I've reneged on so many promises, and I need to start delivering things that I promised on. And it's easy to say, like, I'll do it because I fully have an intention to do it. But then the stack of things to do is so tall, I'm only taking one thing off for every two things I'm promising at this stage. And I need to manage this a little bit better. But definitely, I think I would like to have more people on these community streams. And it's something I would definitely think would be a good idea. Cole Bruning for $10 super chat. Thank you very much. Do you have any resources you can give a former atheist interested in doing a deep dive on Catholic theology? And could you explain your concerns with Peterson? I'm a fan. Thanks for your content. I wrote a document called A Brief Introduction to the Christian Worldview, which I think is on the Canon Society wiki. If not, it's on the Google Drive. I could post that to you. It has some of the books that helped me. Christian theology is so deep that I don't know where you're really coming from. If don't start reading the Bible if you don't believe in God. If you don't believe in God, you need to start thinking about God like Aristotle and Plato did. Develop an understanding of mystery and spirituality and the world of knowledge outside of formalized science, because formalized science can't possibly contain all truths. And then we need to start asking questions about what ultimately comes from this object we have that's called God. And that's where you need to start dipping your toe into theology. So oftentimes it's very hard to answer the general question. I'm kind of coming out of atheism. Where do I start? Because I think it's different for different people. And I think oftentimes people have looked for the magic bullet too much. They're like, oh, it's C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, which, I don't know. Some people, if you hand that to some people who are a little too intellectual, it'll insult their intelligence. And it's not that C.S. Lewis is wrong, but he does talk to people like they're 17 in that book, I feel. And, it's fine if you understand that he's an educator, but at the same time, I don't blame people for thinking that's a little bit condescending. Okay, so the concerns with Peterson. Peterson's life advice is not bad, and everyone will say this. The problem is Peterson, he has an understanding of the crisis we're in. And the crisis we're in, broadly speaking, is that the Enlightenment assumptions are no longer being challenged and are no longer working. They're being challenged. So the assumptions that underlaid Enlightenment principles, and here I'm talking about effective egalitarianism, freedom, individualism, these concepts all relied on having this understanding that pretty much some form of secularized European Western culture was superior. Identity politics would be verboten by a national government who would suppress it, and this nation state could use Enlightenment principles to make people focused on their own lives as opposed to accruing political power in another environment or inside the political sphere. Well, that's no longer holding, and it will no longer hold into the future. And so Peterson understands that the individuals have to sort of get control over their lives, and they have to have an ability to talk about meaning and about consequences, not just in terms of financial consequences, but also in terms of spiritual and edificational consequences. That, if I lie to promote my own ends, I've essentially torn down the project of building myself as a person. That's the core of the secularized Christian culture. This is what the Enlightenment project was doing. And this is absolutely true, and people should embrace that. But this individual virtue focus is not going to be enough to sustain people when the larger apparatus of society that supports these things disintegrates. And so here's the thing. Pardon me, I said here's the thing, and I need to take a... Pardon me. So here's the thing. If we practice virtue not in some kind of super individualist concept like Ayn Rand characters, we practice virtue in the context of a society. If the society turns hard against those virtues, or people start playing political games, and politics becomes in some sense more rewarding than pursuing virtue in a real consistent way, then your virtue is going to get crushed. They say this thing that company is more powerful than will. You can't will yourself to be a virtuous person in a community that is dedicated to non-virtue. You need to find a community, and you need to find, and all communities are political, especially in a democracy, all communities are political. You need to find a community that will support you in that. And to even do that, to organize a community of virtue, it needs to have political power and political sway. Otherwise, it's going to become a political threat to people, and if you're a political threat and you don't have the ability to defend yourself, you're going to get crushed. But Peterson has no language to describe how we can forge a new collective community that will support people in individually pursuing virtue in the way that he discusses. Even if we also point out the flaw that Peterson doesn't really have a framework for structuring his meeting outside pointing to its psychological benefits, which I think, really he's borrowing from Christianity, that combination is going to be really, really bad in the long term. Virtue is not a replacement for political action. And in the sense, salvation is dependent only on virtue. But here's the thing, taking political action in order to defend your community and your posterity is a virtuous action in itself. If you're sitting in France or in Gaul at the fall of the Roman Empire, joining Charlemagne in reestablishing order is a political act, and not an act of inward-looking virtue. But it's a necessary thing to do at the time, and it's the responsible thing to do. And if there weren't strong Christian men to do that, in addition to those who wanted to live contemplative lives with Saint Benedict, then we would never have seen the rebirth of Christian civilization ever. I think I'm probably going to have to re-answer this question. I have some ThoughtSlime videos loaded, but Mac Daradensky says, ThoughtSlime has an IQ room temperature. Prove me wrong. Did you see his video where he reads Stone Toss comics and tries to paint him as a fascist? Yeah, I did. ThoughtSlime is a he makes a living off this stuff. He does. Let's see if I can go to my. I did save some videos, I think, that we could take a look at. He makes a living off of his channel, but he only has one thing that he does, and that is to talk very stupidly, like this. Because if I talk like an idiot and explain my positions, then you will think that my positions are so obviously right that even an idiot like me could come to these conclusions. And if I talk about my opponent's ideas like an idiot, then you'll think that they're being an idiot. Because I will pause when I contradict myself. Every one of his videos, it's exactly the same thing. I don't know how people don't get tired of it. But, well, I should say I do like watching these left tubers because I'm just in such... It's so strange that there's an audience for this, because there very obviously is an audience for this. It really does remind me a little bit of Christian... These can't be all the playlists. What's going on? Sorry guys, I'm just gonna load the okay, here are the videos that I thought would be good too. Oh, here's the ThoughtSlime on white identity. Here's the one that I said I'd do last time. This is the Ian Danskin lecture on platforming people from the new right. That was an interesting one. Well, we might take a look at it, but I will answer super chats because I've learned that I don't want to start these things without having a glass of water in front of me and making sure things cool down a little bit. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to make it through a 30-minute video with commentary. But ThoughtSlime, I know, is he really stupid? Well, he's making a living off of YouTube. He probably doesn't have to pay a mortgage, but at the same time, his people are giving him enough money to live off of. Admittedly, he lives in Newfoundland, so, if you call that life, it could be sustained for the cost of a $34K progressive YouTube channel. I see someone asking me, is there symbolism in Daenerys sacrificing her children for power? Yeah, but that's the thing, right? I mean, they wanted Daenerys at the end to be Medea, and the problem is that they kind of they made her Medea in season 1, and then she was Captain Marvel for seasons 2 through 6, and then they decided to make her Medea again. That doesn't work narratively. I'm not saying they couldn't have turned this into something that would have worked. It just didn't work at all. Is the Canaan Society accepting written material such as essays? Yes, we are. You can send them to me at the email address, and I'll try to get them processed. I need to get editors in line. And that's something that is just going to have to, I'm going to have to do it. I was about to swear there. I'll put something against the wall and get it done. I saw another super chat here. I didn't want to miss it here. Mac Darodensky for $2. Do you think fascism is left or right? Fascism is obviously on the right. I'm going to copy Mencius Moldbug in saying, I'm a reactionary. Hitler was a reactionary. Hitler said he wasn't a reactionary, but Hitler was lying. He was a reactionary. We know that fascism and Nazism are on the right. That does not make them good, but I have eyes in my head. I know what authoritarian tradition-based systems are, and that's a right-wing system, not a left-wing system. So I have a lot of problems with that system. I'm not a fascist, not that anyone is going to take that to the bank, because the current model is you just call everyone fascists. But that is something that it's obviously right-wing. All right, we're getting to the end of the super chats. Okay, our progressive YouTube channels is money laundering schemes. I wonder. I mean, I think there's just so many people who want to. I mean, the progressive side has spent years developing a base that wants to give money to activists. And right now, there's just nothing. I think there's such a hunger on the consumption side for progressive voices that are going to stick up and be the real warriors for their cause online. But I don't think that anyone can really sustain doing honest conversation for very long. They're either going to go down the Vouch route, where you just badger people until they give up, or you're going to go down the ThoughtSlime route, which is just, you're just trying to scoff at people who are not present to defend themselves, and you're never really engaged in any meaningful conversation. So this is a problem. I think this we can actually create an intellectual sphere online that the left cannot. The left cannot create a broad intellectual sphere online, because they can't platform anyone that could possibly violate one of their sacred cows. And for this reason, it's more or less, we found a mode that we can do that they can't, which is also known as a weakness of the left. So I think that the way to play this is to go upstanding, intellectually serious conversations. And that's why I really want to make sure, and there's a reason why I only do Dist Ants series after I make a video, and that is that I just don't want this channel to become live streams. I have a lot of big life changes coming up, and I'm probably going to have to go on hiatus some part of 2020, maybe most of it even. But I want the main deliverable I give to you is video essays of one form or the other, and these Dist Ants things are just me filling out my content. So I always try to make sure that I never do 2 live streams in a row unless there is some distinct need to do 2 live streams in a row. I will never do 2 impromptu over just having a Dist Ants stream because I want to do a Dist Ants stream. And I don't want to take the time to make an essay, because I don't consider live streams are contributions, they are content, but I don't really think that they're not what people are supporting me for. People are supporting me to deliver video essays. And if I lose the time to do these video essays, I'll just apologize, say, okay, if you want to not pay me this month, that's fine. But I'm my deliverable is always first and foremost the video essays or literal essays that I write online. Send a Tiamat for $5. If fascism is right-wing because it's authoritarian, and the Soviets were as right-wing as all get out, they use that argument on me, and it's bullcrap. Yeah, I don't think. You see, I do think that right-wing and authoritarianism are in different spectrums, and so I did speak very sloppily about fascism when I went through it. It wasn't that fascism was authoritarian qua authoritarian. It was authoritarian and to the direction of of establishing order, power, and tradition. And that is more or less the MO of the right wing. The MO is pronomian. They want to make sure that the right wing model is that we have a nomos to follow, because the nomos means that our people survive into the future. And if you violate the nomos, you will fail. And that's what the MO of fascism was, and it used authoritarian means to procure that. Now, in the case of progressivism is antinomian, so their narrative is nomos oppressed us in the past, and it's totally unnecessary for whatever reason. If they're honest, they just say it's not necessary because of technology, but usually because, who doesn't like bashing their ancestors? They say it's oppressive because people were meanies in the past, and they just wanted to make people suffer, and there was never any need for these traditions to begin with, so let's tear down these things and redesign society. And communism, whether it uses authoritarian means to do that or not, was in line with that project. So it's better to look at them in order versus chaos. There's some problems with that because of the mythological associations with order and chaos, but it's not authoritarian versus non-authoritarian. We're not libertarians here. Apologize again for having to run, but I need to get another glass of water. So 1 minute. I just grabbed the water and snagged the Tennessee Jack bottle too. I rarely ever drink, but I found that I really had to take a whiskey to get through this Ben Burgess videos. True confession, I just can't stand academics. Sometimes they're just not. I mean, and it's so funny. Like I am an academic, but I kind of feel like here's an anime. I plan to show this to my wife. Vampire Hunter D. I think I have the relationship to academics that Vampire Hunter D has to vampires. Like I feel like I'm almost kind of one of them, but my purpose of my life is to find them and destroy them, to like end the age of the pretentious intellectual academic. Even though maybe that's destroying myself too, but I can't. The role they play in this discourse, it's so bad. I mean, when Ben Burgess gets on the Majority Report and says Jordan Peterson is a transphobe, I'm like, what the fuck? It's what does he even mean by that, right? I mean, he never said that to his face. And these Majority Report guys they're all nodding like, oh my God, Dr. Ben Burgess, you have a doctor in front of your name. That means you must have written a published peer review paper on how Jordan Peterson's a transphobe. Oh my, facts and logic, guys. This is the authority of the Academy. Just called Jordan Peterson a transphobe. I'm like, what the hell? I have a doctor in front of my names. I think you guys are morons. Put a PhD on that. I mean, it's stupid. This means absolutely nothing. It means you have an incredible knowledge of an incredibly small thing, and yet we treat these people like they're, oh my God, they have all the knowledge. They know how to think. They don't know how to think. They don't even know how to pull their heads out of their own language. Practical people who make money betting on the stock market are better than intellectuals because they know how to actually take risks. This is why military people and even stockbrokers are sleazy as all hell, and they practice usury. So, and you could argue that military men perhaps are too casual about the use of force, but at least they get out of this stupid thing where every single discussion is a language game. It's always a language game. Why? It just, I just, can we stop can we have a discussion that moves on beyond stupid issues about, actually, it's stupid. We would never do this in nerd culture. Actually, Gandalf isn't a human. The priests are their own race. It's just like every single thing becomes a pedantic contest to show how much you've read about a certain topic, and no one's paying attention to the actual problems in an ideology. What's the problem with Marxism? The problem with Marxism is everyone's angry at this thing called capitalism that they think every problem in the world is due to, which is always, whenever I hear that, the thing that every problem in the world is due to is either a religious concept or it's a bullshit political concept. And in this case, it's a bullshit political one. And no one has an idea of what would actually constitute socialism and what would just be capitalism with more welfare statism. And it's never consistently argued or even defined. Pseudo-analyst for $5. Nothing says tradition like killing priests and aristocrats. The third position is called so for a reason. Were the fascists killing priests? Maybe they killed aristocrats. I guess they killed priests that oppose them politically. I'm not defending Mussolini. I think the guy is terrible, but he was ineffective at saving his people. If the immorality of things he did was also not good, like hitching his wagon to the Third Reich under the leadership of an insane person. But, I think it's just his justifications, whether or not he shot priests, was that he was promoting sort of the traditional order that was going to carry Italy into the future. And for that reason, I think it's quite clear that fascism is a right-wing ideology. I mean, of course, like right-wing, left-wing, these are, to borrow a word from Ben Burgess, these are family resemblances. We all have an instinct about what's right-wing and what's left-wing. We all have an instinct that the left wins, in non-war scenarios, the left wins over the right over time. The best theory I have ever heard has been Mencius Bugs entropic theory of why this is the case. Yeah, that's it. Oh, Dreadnought for $2. Missed my last super chat. You got intellectuals perfectly. I missed your last super chat. Okay, I'll check that. Cordy ASFGH. How much satanic influence do you think resides within the Catholic Church? 43 quantiles of satanic influence. I don't know. I mean, there are distinct bad actors in the Catholic Church that need to be taken out. I used to think that these bad actors were only on the low level. They are only in provincial areas. But from everything we've seen, I think it's prudent to say, and again, I haven't seen this, I'm just basing this off of what I've seen from people like Church Militant, and they seem to be well documented, that this problem of bad actors is riddled throughout the Vatican, and we need to take these bad leaders out. And yeah, that's I should have said 41 because it's one less than 42, the meaning of the universe, and it's also prime because it's a primeval. I don't know. This is a little nerdy even for me. I can go back and do the super chats. Maybe I should do the Eli Bosnick? Oh, Eli Bosnick. I got into a huge Twitter fight with him this weekend when I was sitting in an airport in Canada. That guy is one huge asshat. I mean, like, I thought he was a comedian who did sort of like off-color stuff, but he's the kind of guy that the second you engage with him, the second you engage him on an idea, he's like, oh, you're a Catholic. Let me just talk about how you're in a cult that wants to sexually abuse children. Yeah, great, Eli. I mean, weren't you talking about how you thought political violence was justified? I mean, but no, we have to talk about, there can't be any issue that we talk about that wasn't the issues we were talking about in 2008 when New Atheism was still relevant, which, spoiler guys, it's not anymore. No one freaking cares about New Atheism. It's a meaningless idea. I really feel sorry for the people like, was it Dark Matter 2525 who still are in this mode. I'm making fun of the Bible. Ha ha ha. Look, there's contradictions. There's things that don't appear to match up with our post-enlightenment ethics. I'm really smart. Look, aren't religious people stupid? Guess what, guys? When we get rid of religion, good people won't do bad things anymore. Because good people do good things and bad people do bad things. But it takes religion to make good people do bad things. I don't know. This is so stupid. This is so tiresome. People like Eli Bosnick are still on this topic. It's like watching somebody who still hasn't. I don't know. I mean, it's like watching somebody who hasn't like gotten past the 70s. Like they're still in that mode of thought and they can never get past it. Pardon me, guys. If you're living in California, it's really hard to miss people who haven't gotten over the 60s and 70s, but they do exist. And I feel like looking at this atheist community, you're looking at people who can't get over 2008. There are issues that apply that you can't just use logic and reason to get past. I think we should do, since I usually like to make these things 2 hours, maybe we should watch the video. Unless someone has, if anyone wants to talk about a topic, I never think a monologue is a bad use of time. Let's do the video. What video are we going to do? Are we going to do the video? I was going to do this video, Ian Dashkin from Innuendo Studios. So let's see how this appears. No, not cultural Marxism. Okay. So, just for people who are curious about what this is the guy who does Innuendo Studios, and he's an early left tuber, and he sort of perfected the idea of the scoff. And he talks about how right-wingers conceptualize their ideas with really no knowledge of how right-wingers think, which is kind of funny. Maybe before I start this, I'll go and see if I missed a super chat here or there. Probably should do that beforehand. Oh, okay, super chats, pardon me. Okay. So Matt Darodensky says ThoughtSlime has an IQ of room temperature. Prove me wrong. Thank you very much. I think we already answered that one. John Smith for pure contribution for $2. I did actually read Michael Mellis's book on the New Right. I thought it was very good. I didn't like his sort of anarchist take on it. I thought it was a little bit, I don't know, I felt it kind of clashed. I feel anarchism makes the very mistakes that the Enlightenment makes on steroids, and so I feel like he hadn't really internalized a lot of the people he was studying. Knight Errant, that video really spoke to the problem with internet politics. I think it was a great video, and every YouTuber should think about what you said at the end of the video. I know I did. Well, thank you very much. I think you're talking about my video that released, the Magical Odyssey one. Yeah, I hope people do. I mean, I don't want to engage on Twitter with Ben. I want to have him in a live stream so that we can have a heart-to-heart. And I think that will come out there. And I think the truth will come out if we speak on a very honest level and not at the level of chuckling under our breaths. Oh, isn't it ridiculous that you don't believe this? That mode's just not working for me. So with no more ado, let's start this video and see how far we can get through it.
My name is Ian Danskin. I'm a video essayist. I run a YouTube channel called Innuendo Studios. If you've ever heard of me, it's probably for one of these videos. I want to talk to you today about a problem that's been on my mind for several years that was made kind of acute when Donald Trump was elected. I don't know how to talk to the right. I have spent several stretches of my adult life
Then why do you make a goal on your YouTube channel about discussing the right that you never have talked, that you don't talk to or don't know how to talk to. And this is so funny because the left has spent the last 100 years assuring us that friendly conversation and persuasion could overcome any cultural barrier. Any cultural barrier imaginable could be overcome through friendly persuasion. So why right now are they having such a hard time figuring out how to respond to the right? It doesn't make any sense from their own point of view. I will say, people hearing this, I'll talk about distributism a little bit more towards the end. I hear a comment in the chat. Opinions on, well, that'll have to wait till after I'm done with the video. But anyway, if people are not hearing this, then just text me in the chat. But he's saying that he doesn't know how to talk to the right.
Trying to talk to the right, from arguing at lunch with my conservative friends in high school, to arguing with them on Facebook when they all grew up to be Tea Partiers, to debating with Republican relatives at family reunions, and to spending a lot of 2015 trying to have conversations with angry anti-feminist gamers. And out of the at least hundreds of hours that I spent talking to the right and the dozen or so conversational tactics I've tried, I can say that the number of times I actually changed somebody's mind was maybe once. So eventually I gave up. It was kind of a crappy batting average. But I'm the kind of person who can only shut down because he's overwhelmed for so long, and at the end of the day, I'm not going to stop feeling overwhelmed until I'm doing something about the problem. So I went back to the library. After seeing the election of Donald Trump and the rise of the alt-right.
I mean, this is the thing. He wouldn't be surprised about that batting average if he knew anything about how humans conceptualize cultural assumptions. Humans don't change their opinions very much, which is why opinions have a definite tribal nature to them. And this is another reason why this Enlightenment idea that you can sort of argue everyone onto the same opinion is just fundamentally misguided. And we look at this and we go, oh, well, how could you read human psychology and think that you could argue somebody into the right opinion? And you're like, oh, that's stupid. Then you realize, wait, hey, isn't that the presupposition behind the democratic process as we've come to believe it post our founding fathers? As we've come to believe it post progressive Christianity and progressive liberalism of the 20th century? This is what we're supposed to believe. So, I know the founding fathers didn't believe this, but this is how the myth has transmogrified since then. And it's obviously and transparently false. And I guess I can't blame Ian Dashkin for believing the Enlightenment's own bullshit. I mean, that's just how we'll keep on going.
Right. I went back to the library. So last year I started a new video series called The Alt-Right Playbook. It's a collection and dissection of the rhetorical tactics the far right uses to legitimize itself and to gain influence over the Republican Party.
Note, they are the exact same tactics that the left and the far left used in the 60s. And this is sort of the strange secret, and the most interesting thing about Innuendo Studios' series, The Alt-Right Playbook, is the fact that with very few exceptions, none of the tactics that they use weren't just completely copy-pasted from identity movements and civil rights movements in the 60s. So it's not a lot of, this is the great irony is somewhere in there.
And if that sounds like a good time, please like, share, and subscribe. So far, every episode ends with a don't. I detail a mode of argument, and then I say, if you see someone arguing in this mode, don't argue with them. But in a broad sense, the series is my attempt to solve this problem. I don't think you can solve a problem you don't understand, and I don't think you can talk to the right in any useful fashion if you don't know why what you've been trying hasn't been working. So my long-term goal for the series is to end not with a don't, but with a collection of do's. A video detailing some of the best practices for dealing with the right. What I want to talk about today is essentially what that video would be if I were making it right now.
Well, this is interesting because I think Jonathan Haidt did outline a bunch of different a bunch of different things you can do to sort of engage people that come from different presuppositions than you do. And I wonder how much overlap there's actually going to be. But I'm going to let this video go on so that we can kind of make it through the review in sort of a timely fashion.
So I want to call this talk Getting Past the Alt-Right Playbook, but I have to disclaim, this is a work in progress. I'm still studying the problem. I don't have all the answers. In fact, a few months from now, I may look back at this presentation and say, wow, I had like none of the answers. So we're going to proceed in a spirit of exploration. We're figuring this out together. This is what I'm confident in right now, and whatever I say at the end of the series will at least be informed by what I say today.
So just for people who are interested in the Canon Society and developing chapters, and they're sort of thinking to themselves, like, what can you do? Like, what's an achievable goal? Having little lecture circuits like this, where you rent out a room in a university, where you create student chapters and get people to speak on an intellectual topic, where someone who's reasonably confident in speaking can go through an entire presentation and students can discuss. That's an achievable and a very cheap goal to realize for any organization. And if someone online can figure out how to do that and bring it, instantiate it into the real world, they will have taken a distinct step forward. Because once you can look like this guy does on stage, and, you know, and I know the alt-right does this, but have you seen their conferences? You have, like, Millennial Woes and Richard Spencer step up there. I mean, the normies are going to run screaming from this. I mean, sure, this Ian guy looks like he might have a little bit of a soy or quality to him, and I'm not going to comment on the other words that are commonly applied to Ian online. But he still looks respectable. He still looks like a guy that's a professional who knows what he's doing. Let's reason together. This is what reasoning together looks like. And so for this reason, I think that this is the kind of image that a nudist and right faction would need to procure for itself.
One last thing before we begin. I get this comment a fair bit, mostly from Republicans who feel that they have been shit on by my videos, and it doesn't seem anything I say is going to change their feelings about that. But sometimes I get it from people I consider to be on my side. I actually recently got it from someone very dear to me, whose politics I greatly admire. So I think it's worth addressing. There is a sense these days that if you say a person has bad politics, you're also saying that they're a bad person. Like,
yeah, how could we have possibly gotten this impression? How could? Oh my God, guys! I mean, this is the Ben Burgess thing, and you know, and I don't want to hammer this in too much, but I always wonder how could this possibly, how could a progressive possibly ask this? How could Ben Burgess watch my video on Marxists and go, the distributist is being disingenuous because he's presenting Marxism like it cares too much about equality, even though the distributist said that Marx didn't believe in equality. But because he didn't say that loudly enough, the distributist is astonishingly ignorant of Marx. And then you can find online Richard Wolff giving a lecture where he talks about Marx's mission was equality. And he's saying this in front of all of these wide-eyed freshmen who are just like eating this up, equality. That's what Marx wanted. And I'm thinking, I know this is like the second hit you get from Richard Wolff. And Richard Wolff is one of Ben's go-to people. Was Ben astonished when he saw this video? Was he astonished that this scion of Marxist politics was getting up there and saying, oh, Marx was just all about equality? No, he wasn't, because this impression is given to people who are young and impressionable, because young people want to believe in equality at that part of their lives. And so you give them that impression so they sign on to your social movement when they're 19 and don't know any better to call you out on your bullshit. And that's how this game is played. I just don't know how can you expect, like, when Innuendo Studios has largely been responsible, not only been responsible, there's many people responsible for this, but the entire MO for the left has been, if you're a Republican, you're a bad person. That's why we deplatform you and don't just discuss you. You're a bad faith actor. Every single person, he's a bad faith actor. Block, That's how they deplatform you. If you're just a person with a bad opinion, well, you discuss bad opinions, right? But you don't deplatform people unless they're bad people. And this, of course, is... I don't understand how anybody on the modern left could possibly complain about how this misperception is mysteriously invaded the mainstream. They built it! I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we'll continue.
That if somebody votes for a shitty candidate, they're also probably like a shitty boyfriend. And to some degree, I think that's appropriate. Like who a person is politically and who they are personally are not separate, and we shouldn't treat them as such.
Okay, so maybe we do understand how this is being conflated too. But I mean, but this doesn't even make any sense. Does that mean if you vote Republican, you are a shitty boyfriend? I mean, he knows that doesn't add up. But I mean, this is the sort of doublespeak that you get. You're speaking out of both sides of your mouth. You want to play both black and red on the roulette wheel because you want to communicate something to an audience, but also convince them that they're not actually believing that, because everyone knows that believing that is bad faith.
But, the personal is political and all that. But I think it's silly to act as if a person with junk politics therefore has no value whatsoever. If I still lived in the same city as my Tea Party friends, I don't doubt that they'd be the kinds of pals who would, no questions asked, call out of work to help me move on a Monday. But they'd also vote to take away my healthcare on a Tuesday. And the calculus by which someone weighs those two things to determine whether or not they're a good person just isn't that interesting to me.
Well, how is it not? I mean, they're either going to be your friends or they're not. You're either going to work with them or not, and you're either going to platform them or you're not. You can't have a conversation with somebody that you don't think is honest, and if the calculus comes out that you weigh a bad vote on a healthcare decision above someone actually dedicating their time and money to help you, is insane. First of all, I mean, a vote is... This is why... I mean, this picture... I mean, it just... If there was one picture, and I know people probably can't see this because it's a picture inside of this picture on your screen, but what this is showing, essentially... I'm still broadcasting this, too. What this is essentially showing is a stick figure, and it says, helps you to move, presumably, according to Ian, calling out of work to help you to move, so there's financial loss. And then it says, takes away your health care. Well, no, but he's not taking away your health care. Even if, voting against a government policy is taking something away, he's casting a vote a vote that's neutral on face, that the money is not going to take money away from other people to buy you health care. I mean, why should somebody's political opinion on how we allocate funds for the future or for the present figure into whether they're a good person or not? It's how much they sacrifice to help out their friends that determines whether they're a good person or not. The vote is utterly meaningless. So this is why this is the most poisonous image in democracy, because it encourages us to see our friends and neighbors as sort of extensions of political organs. I mean, that's disgusting, right? How could someone who dedicates his life to help you be a shit person because of the fact that he has a political opinion about how the country should spend money? We're not even talking about like, oh, he voted for Adolf Hitler and I'm Jewish and Adolf Hitler wants to destroy Jews. He's talking about, I think it's better for America overall if we have a partially privatized system than a fully public system or a single payer system. I mean, thinking that something is better for the same population is a statement about how you think things are going to evolve in the future. It's like making a bet on a roulette wheel. It could be a bad bet, but the belief that some number is going to come up doesn't make you a bad person for placing the bet. Yet somehow this decision, this assessment of reality is reflected back onto the person and essentially colors him ultimately as a moral entity. This guy has these attributes to him, but the only thing you can see in his little Alvin and the Chipmunks smock he's wearing is that he's a MAGA supporter. And so this really disgusts me about democracy. Now, I'll definitely include this in my next video on the topic, but we're staring into one of the big problems right here. I probably should check the chat to see if there's any super chats, but what the hell, I'll just go on.
I don't think one of these things negates or redeems the other. People are more complicated than that. So I'm not in the business of judging a person's humanity. I'm also not going to pretend that taking away my healthcare isn't personal. For many, the idea that I can tell someone, you are not only wrong, but your beliefs are doing measurable harm, and still see them as a complete human.
I mean, does this guy look like he's ever considered whether his ideas might be doing measurable harm? I mean, this is the thing. The progressives think that they're only playing this game. The only way beliefs can be doing measurable harm is on the right. There's been numerous progressive policies that have caused measurable harm to minority communities in the past that we can see right now. What's the reaction we have to them? Oh, well, who cares? At least we tried. Again, I'm paraphrasing Mencius Moldbug here. It's the perfect example of callous altruism. They don't believe that they're actually playing a game, whether they're doing measurable harm. If you're on the left, you're not doing measurable harm. And the further left you go, the less likely you are going to be doing measurable harm. I doubt there's a single person on the left that they could say, you're doing measurable harm based on your political views. I challenge a leftist to point that out to me.
Will not compute. But for the record, I don't have trouble with it. So let's get into it. Whenever something like Trump happens, I feel like there's this wave of shame on the left. This is our fault. We didn't talk enough to the other side. Now look what happened. And there is this big redoubling of our efforts to try to converse more, speak up, disagree more. And I feel that there are things the left considers appropriate when talking to the right. And when this redoubling happens, we don't change up our tactics, we just do the same things, only more. So here are some things the left does that I suspect either don't work or are of only limited use. Debates.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, it's going to be basically all dialogue, right? I mean, like, debates. Politicians and people who talk about ideas have them. I personally like debates because they let you see how two ideas fit together and clash against each other. I don't really like the idea of people winning debates, but I like the fact that they happen. And the the Peterson versus Zizek debate, I mean, I thought that was good. The thing that it achieved something. I think what it achieved it essentially, I think, demonstrated that the reactionary problem with Peterson is the same as the radical left reaction with Peterson, and that simultaneously Jordan Peterson understands that he doesn't have a solution for the crisis that's coming, but at the same time, neither does anyone that can properly call themselves a Marxist. And this is more or less tacitly admitted to by Zizek. And that was a very, very important conclusion to come to. I don't want to downplay that at all. And it came out of a debate, a quote-unquote debate. I mean, it wasn't, people weren't getting scored on this thing, certainly. And so the thing is I don't know. I mean, debates are a way to get knowledgeable about topics. They're not really about convincing people. I think that might be the mistake.
Two people of differing opinions agree to discuss their beliefs in public. Because debates are public, they tend to be highly performative. It's not in either speaker's best interest to just fully change their positions in front of an audience. So the aim is not to change the mind of the person you're speaking with, it's to change however many minds in the audience as possible. We do this out of the faith that the truer argument will be the most convincing argument. Here's the catch. Your average viewer of a debate is going to come in with two biases. First, that the subject is worth debating in the first place. That if you put Bill Nye against a creationist, you are implying that evolution and creationism are on roughly equal footing. Second is the bias towards the status quo. The average viewer is going to reflexively identify with whichever position is closer to their experience. Whomever represents the status quo is going to win over more of the audience.
Okay, but this is the case, then why are people worried about putting Jared Taylor or Richard Spencer on a debate stage? Not that I like either of them, but they're most definitively against the status quo. But we're going to get to a bigger problem about this in a second. I'm going to let it run.
If the debate is, again, Bill Nye and a creationist, the crowd is going to overwhelmingly side with Bill Nye. But the creationist doesn't care. Standing next to Bill Nye makes them look respectable, and if they swing even a handful of people to their side, they grew their numbers by a little bit. Meanwhile, evolutionary science gains basically nothing. This is part of the long-term game of mainstreaming a fringe belief.
Okay, but see, this is an implicit. I can't. See, this is the thing. The progressives have essentially re-derived the necessary existence of the cathedral in this very conversation we're having right now. They're like, okay, well, we can't have a debate because the debate has presuppositions about what's worth debating, what's in the Overton window, blah, 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 blah. All of these presuppositions about what's going in, who's legitimately carrying an idea forward. All of these things. And the framing of the debate matters, and people have status quo bias. And so the debate needs to be responsibly curated in order to get people to a more or less right decision. Well, I guess they were, in the past, were debates always curated to do that? Well, come to think of it, I guess they were. Well, who curates these debates to make sure that only the right two people who have legitimate opinions are on the stage at the same time? Who decides what's in the frame of the acceptable things to debate? I mean, is communism in that Overton window? I mean, it killed 100 million people in this century, or last century, I should say. But does it get platformed? And that who decides? I mean, if it can't be democracy that decides that, and if these questions decide that more than the actual votes of the debate through convincing power to, then what the hell is the myth of democracy based on? Really nothing. We're getting some outside noise. On the flip
side, if the debate is, are trans women women, then the status quo position is, sadly, in this country, no. And the person arguing yes is going to need more out of that debate than just a handful of converts and a bit more legitimacy. Because the difference between a trans activist and a creationist is creationists don't get murdered for being creationists. And when
well, depending if you're on some kind of communist country, but whatever, we're going to ignore that.
Those are the stakes. A debate where a few people swing to your side, but everyone else feels even more strongly that trans women aren't women, isn't really a net gain. About the only time I recommend a public debate is when it's damage control. You've been invited into a debate that you know is going to happen with or without you, and you know that you will do less harm than whoever's next on their list. And even then, I might change my mind in a month.
But of course, I mean, I'm not going to go. This is see, Ian doesn't know this, but he's refuting the Enlightenment. Because if you can't rely on people to make up their minds about this in a more or less consistent fashion, then why even take people's votes to begin with? Why even have elections? Because the person who gets to decide the balance of the debate is going to be the person who manufactures the consent at the polls.
So, number 2, public rebuttals. Somebody says something wrong, hateful, or just poorly reasoned, and you make a post or a video or a tweet storm explaining why it's wrong.
I just have to pause it here. Is anyone else getting like weird vibes from that guy's mole? I feel like it's about to sprout arms and legs or something and like walk down the guy's neck. There's something really Lynchian about that right now. It's really bizarre. I don't know what's popping out in my mind right now, but I don't know. I'm digressing.
We typically start a rebuttal by illustrating the other person's argument and then going into detail about its flaws and ramifications. The problem we run into here is a certain cognitive bias that everybody contends with, and it's called anchoring. This is the tendency to latch on too tightly to the first thing someone says. So if you start things off with someone else's argument, you're actually doing them a favor, because readers remember headlines better than they remember bodies of text. And this is a pretty standard format for liberal think pieces. How many articles have you read that is climate change a hoax? Are queer TV characters tokens? I am guilty.
Is whiteness violence? You could do this with all sorts of radical headlines where they present a neutral topic in certain ways. All this is telling us is that without making any malfeasant reporting, the media can essentially structure narratives in order to influence how people structure things inside their own mind. They can reframe things. And who has this power? Is it some secret Republican cabal that has the power to print headlines? When we looked at the broad swath of people who had the power to create headlines and to put people on television who said certain bylines, were those the evil right-wingers or the progressives? Because last time I checked, almost all of these powers of framing lie firmly in progressive hands. So all he's saying, he's admitting essentially that nothing we engage in, even as right-wingers, is going to be fair in any way. Because this whole idea of this neutral public discourse is bullshit.
Guilty of this myself. I made a video that was pretty much structured as, has cultivation theory been disproven? So, nope. Okay. If you know Betteridge's law, you know that the answer to all these questions is no. But this format, which we fall into because it makes us look really even-handed, actually weakens our arguments. You'll notice that the alt-right doesn't write this way. When Richard Spencer titles an article, "Is Black Genocide Right?" his answer is yes.
I don't think it is, but whatever. We've seen similar articles like this. I put some in my last video. You know, is whiteness violence? Is whiteness an atrocity? I mean, like, pretty much everything from BuzzFeed or Salon.com has this formulation with whiteness. Yeah, you're right. Structuring headlines is power. Who has that power?
He titles his article with what he wants you to agree with. He doesn't care if the article itself doesn't support this because he knows his readers won't remember most of the content. And I've found that most often when the right makes an argument, they expect you to respond using the rebuttal format. If you just write a piece about a queer character on TV and it's just clear that they aren't a token, if you don't frame that as a counter-argument, if you don't center their debate, they will claim you haven't responded. They won't recognize any argument that doesn't incidentally spread their rhetoric. Number 3 is meeting people where they're at. So there are some studies going around that argue that if you do some work to reframe progressive ideas into more conservative language, you can get a bit more traction with the right.
I mean, this is, funnily enough, there is a huge study about this that was published by someone's PhD thesis, and it about how if you just reformulated ideas about gay marriage, then conservatives would just magically come around to seeing things your way. And it was all faked. It was all faked. This only goes so far. So, you know, this is something that we're going to need to work on. I mean, I think we should meet people where they're at, because I don't think the left can do this, because I think they're sort of programmed to want to get a response that you're never really going to get. Their coalition is so fragile that they essentially have to have people use the exact same language, or otherwise they're never going to get their coalition into the same Democratic National Convention to beat the Republicans. So in that sense, I think, you know, they're expecting the meet people where you at to do more work for them than it actually realistically can do.
For example, if you frame climate science not in conservationist terms, but in more like military terms, conservatives are a bit more receptive to it. So, we must defend our vital resources from the horrific encroachment of blah-de-blah-de-blah. I am extremely wary of this method, primarily because it assumes that the problem with progressive ideals is that they haven't been fit into a conservative worldview. But what if the problem isn't a failure of communication? What if the problem is the worldview?
Well, the problem is the worldview. What creates the worldview, and who manages the worldview? Who watches the watchers? It's amazing. The thing is, the left may have invented postmodernism, but none of them are taking it seriously. They're all talking in postmodernist terms, but it's all they're never going the final step in understanding how these ideas undermine their own Enlightenment goals to begin with. So I'm gonna take a break here and answer some super chats. Except for the opinion. Well, okay, maybe you guys can help me on this. Opinions on Corleo Zelia Cornu. I don't know who that is. That's for $2. Maybe I can answer it later when somebody can pop it into my she's a Romanian politician. You know who would know about that? Mark Citadel. He's like all about that Romanian stuff. I have despite the fact that my father was born in Serbia, I have no knowledge of Eastern European politics. So, yeah, because he left when he was like 8 or something. Okay, disciple of Dave the Distributist for $20 DKK. Great one. Thine is the promised savior of the right. Well, thanks. I like your icon. For $2 Australian, Ben Bassett. For after, chances Lord of the Rings, Amazon will butcher Tolkien. Lord of the Rings Amazon. Oh, there's a Lord of the Rings Amazon series. We'll have to talk about that later. I got a pure contribution from Nate Higgers. Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, man. For $3 Canadian. Paul Cornelius for $5. Mike Malice mentioned twice on live streams that you wanted you on. You game? Please check out his book, The New Right. Well, I just read it. It was pretty good. Hey, yeah, I totally go on Michael Malice's show. That sounds perfect. I loved his book. That was really, really good. I mean, there needs to be a transformation on the right. There just needs to be. Lucid Dreamer for $10. The personal is political is an excuse to be a shitty person. My dad has a multicentric Castleman's disease and relied on advanced medicine. His health shouldn't be the subject of a cost-benefit analysis. Yes, I agree with that. I mean, okay, but if it's not subject to a cost-benefit analysis, then we shouldn't fucking vote on it, right? So this is not an argument, and I want to be clear about this. I'm not saying that catastrophic healthcare expenses shouldn't be prioritized as elements that should be taken care of by the government. But if you're going to say that this shouldn't be the subject of a cost-benefit analysis, or that this shouldn't be subject of a debate, if you put this to a democratic vote, then you're inviting people to apply a cost-benefit analysis or a debate over it. That's otherwise, why are you even polling the people? If we want to have a government do this, we should definitively understand that there are things that the government has a right to deliver, and then build that into a system where it's formalized, so that we know exactly where it begins and ends, and then go from there, so that we don't have to blame people for coming to a different conclusion in their cost-benefit analysis calculations. So I don't know. I mean, this is something that otherwise you're just going to have a population of people that always hates each other over political decisions, and that's not a price I feel comfortable paying for democracy. But let's let Ian go on a little bit more and talk about how we realize the Enlightenment's bullshit, but for some reason we haven't used this realization to question progressive values, because that's essentially what this lecture amounts to.
Because making climate science palatable by playing to the right's militarism kind of shoots us in the foot when we also have to say we need to end the war on terror, or not provoke North Korea, or work towards some kind of sustainable peace in Israel. The right's militarism is one of the things we're trying to combat. And this makes it extremely hard for progressivism to be intersectional, because now climatologists have to throw peace activists under the bus.
And so now you see, this is very critical, actually. I'm really glad you mentioned, you see the motivations of this. They can't shift language or shift frame because their coalition is so big and so diverse that their organization and language that they use to unify the organization has become brittle and fragile, and they can't move. This is a distinct weakness of the modern left. And I think it's fascinating, but you hear it right now. Implicitly, he's saying we can't move because our coalition won't allow it.
Number 4 is sunlight. I still sometimes come across the argument that sunlight is the best disinfectant. That if you just give awful people a microphone, they will expose themselves as so obviously wrong and reprehensible that they will end their own careers. I think by 2018 we should be pretty done with this idea. I'm not sure it was ever true, but it especially isn't true in the era of partisan news networks and curated feeds.
Well, it was true when, I mean, this is how, yeah, I mean, we already know this. This is basically how the left got the countercultural framework into power to begin with from 1968 to 1998. They used this idea that if someone's ostentatious and is taking a controversial political position, then you got to give them a microphone because they're speaking truth. They're being edgy, and that's really interesting. But now the left's realizing that this is not a tool for progressivism. This is just a tool that undermines whoever is currently in charge of the societal consensus, which at this stage is entirely progressive. They're the ones who run the headlines. Now, with this just one exception, like Bonk's News Network is the only news network that is definitively right-wing in a sea of different news networks that are comprised 95% of journalists who vote Democrat. And they can't stop talking about how put down by the framework of this one news channel, they are. It's sort of amazing. I don't think they've ever imagined what it would be like for the reverse to be true. If you said, hey, I know you think Fox News is unfair, but I got this portal, and I can take you to a universe, like in Bioshock Infinite, where the political affiliations of all of the cable news and mainstream news are completely reversed. And since you think, Fox News is such a powerful entity in molding people's opinions, you'll like this new world more. And they'd say, absolutely not. I guarantee it.
Whether or not something is a scandal or an embarrassment depends on how your chosen news source contextualizes it. And that's if they tell you about it at all. If a scandal isn't on Fox News, Republicans won't even know that it happened. And even when people know the horrible truth, if they are invested enough in a person or a platform or a narrative, they will find ways to be okay with it. In the age of Trump, I think there is such a thing as too much rope to hang yourself. And finally, snappy metaphors. There is a certain type of article that, when a good one gets written, tends to circulate in liberal circles, the ones that really cleverly explain some complex idea like institutional racism. And, as a guy who explains...
Okay. Well, yeah, I wonder, is there any person who is converted by this? I don't know, man. I mean, this is a far cry from Letter from a Birmingham Jail. I'll say that. Letter from a Birmingham Jail, I'm sure, converted many conservative Orthodox Christians to the cause of integration. Straight white male, the lowest difficulty setting, not so much.
Complex stuff on the internet as a career, I will never say no to a good metaphor. But these tend to be the same handful of arguments wrapped up in new metaphors every time, and I can never shake the idea that when one of these things makes the round, there's this underlying assumption that if we could just share the right metaphor about racism far enough and wide enough, white people would finally get it.
I mean, but do progressive white people get it? And what do progressive white people actually do that is so enlightened? I keep on bringing this up to progressives, and I keep on hearing crickets. They always use, when I bring this up, they do what all progressives do and throw all the other progressives under the bus. I'm like, okay, so if progressives get it so hard, if they get it so hard that they're the ones educating us with articles that read straight white male, the lowest difficulty setting, then why do progressive white areas like Berkeley have such horrendous racial inequality? Why didn't them getting woke fix the problem? Was it like the 3 Republicans in Berkeley, California spoil the whole dish? They have to hunt them down like witches in order to make the racial diversity work. Progressives they never want to admit this, but the product, the white progressive, is a pathetic product to have as an end goal of any kind of political movement, and no one's buying it. Because if I said, okay, be like Ian Danskin and we'll fix racial diversity, we'll fix all of America's racial problems, I'm like, how the hell is being like Ian Danskin going to solve any of the racial problems we have? He's just as privileged, he's just as oblivious, he's just as white as anyone else is in conservative Christian America. And I don't see how any of this is going to fix any of the problems we have, which mainly stem from money, culture, racial division, in-group preferences, and a variety of other factors that I'm not going to get into because I still want to have a YouTube channel. So it's transparently false if you're saying, oh, the goal is to convert white conservatives into white progressives. Well, what the hell are white progressives even going to solve? Other than a permanent Democratic majority, which would be quite good to have, actually. I'm quite a fan of this idea that Mencius Mollbug had. If we could just abolish the Republican Party forever and never have it reappear, then we would immediately solve most of our problems.
And, these articles can be useful for educating people already predispositioned to listen to you. Just because someone's on your side in fighting racism doesn't mean they actually understand racism. Having many times in my life been the ignorant white ally, I can vouch for the usefulness of these articles. But there is this pervasive sense on the part of some liberals that racism is just a big misunderstanding. And I just kind of want to sit people down and ask them, what lesson do you think white supremacy needs to learn that losing 2 of the bloodiest wars in U.S. history didn't already teach them?
Well, it can't be we'll shoot you if you're a racist, right? Because, neither World War II nor the Civil War were about racism, regardless of how they're being presented here. But, if white supremacy didn't get destroyed by two wars, then what's the goal then, too? Is you can't fight Civil War 2.0 against Red America? That's essentially what they want.
What language do you think you're going to find that hasn't already been articulated by Oluo, Coates, Hooks, Lord, King, X, Hughes, Truth, Douglas, Tubman, or hundreds of other writers and poets over the last 2 centuries?
I like how Coates totally name upstage both Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Ta-Nehisi Coates has gotten so much acclaim for one shit book. I can't possibly imagine anyone who's gotten more accolades for doing less.
If on some level you feel that racism still exists just because black people haven't found the right words to advocate for themselves, I'm just going to throw it out there, you might be white. And finally, empathy. I know I said finally before, but this is double finally. I'm not going to be the guy who advocates against empathy.
But I kind of am.
A repeated phrase on my channel is empathy is a beautiful thing, but... And truly, empathy is a beautiful thing. But in all my conversations with conservatives and reactionaries, I found that if someone came at me with anger and condescension and I responded in kind, the whole experience was miserable.
Wow, he uses the Calvin in arguing with Susie gif as well. That's become ubiquitous. I love it. I use it all the time in my videos. I'd find a new one now.
But if I responded with patience and generosity and empathy, I could diffuse some of that anger and the conversation would be a lot more tolerable. But it was always the same conversation. I had my position, they had theirs, we both felt duty-bound to talk to each other, but nothing ever came of it. How much empathy I used only determined how awful I felt at the end of it. Now, when people say that the most important tool for talking to the right is empathy, it seems that they want the conversation to be more human. They don't expect it to be more productive. So, I'm not selling empathy out. I'm sure whatever techniques actually work will work better if empathy is involved. But empathy is not something you owe to strangers, and in my experience, a lot of the time, people you argue with will conflate empathy with validation. If you don't treat their belief in the Jewish conspiracy as equally valid to your belief in not that, they will call you cold and condescending.
I can see what this guy's having a hard time finding things to do. It seems like this, I honestly don't, conspiracy theories are sort of their own thing. Everyone has encountered people who believe in conspiracies and they're impossible to argue people out of. Usually you take the G.K. Chesterton method and not really try to argue people out of conspiracies, but to ask people, well, why does it even really matter? What are we going to do about it, right? Let's say it is true, but, don't we want to live our lives and accomplish something? And it seems that most of the time the conspiracy is more or less a reason not to do something. The difficulty is, the problem in all of this that Ian doesn't realize is that Ian doesn't really have a place to put the people he's trying to convert. If there was an image of some kind of upstanding white person who had his views, who didn't make a lot of money, I think their ability to kind of convince people to occupy this role in society would be instantly a lot easier, but they no longer have that vision. So now they're trying to convince people to be the rightmost side of an ever shifting Overton window, where you're always just on the boundary of being the most hated person in the world. No one wants to be David Brooks. No one wants to be the person who's constantly running to the left so that he can stay within the Overton window of the New York Times. Or at least no one wants to be David Brooks without getting David Brooks' royalty checks and New York Times salary. That much is for sure. It's not fun to be David Brooks because you're essentially just somebody's servant. You're a servant of the cathedral at that stage. You're a servant of whoever is designing the Overton window, and they get to design the conversation, and then whatever the conversation's rightmost acceptable element is the place where you go. You have no ability to actually explore ideas beyond that. And so Ian's not really offering anybody anything that's real. And I think that's the reason why empathy is not working for him. I think, by contrast, if right-wingers used empathy, I'm not saying, there's some Enlightenment mythology. Most of the time you can't convince people. But this actually might work for people who are going in the rightward direction. If you go to somebody who's sick and tired of having to be the white ally, and you give them a role to be where they can be a responsible hero inside of a community that is multi-generational, that will live forever, I think that's a much easier place for them to be, and they don't have to hate anyone or do anything bad. They just have to change their opinions, view history differently. I think that's something that's very, very powerful. I think empathy is something that worked for them for a very, very long time, and they feel kind of betrayed by it because it's suddenly stopped working.
So, by all means, if you have it in you to be empathetic, be empathetic. But don't expect empathy to do the work for you. Don't expect it to be recognized. And don't let them define what counts as empathy. One last thing. So, here we go. You see someone saying something false or bigoted or misleading, and you want to push back against it. Before you do, ask yourself a question. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to debunk or persuade? These are different things, and they require different methods. You don't do yourself any favors if you mix them up.
I would say that this is actually genuinely good advice, and this could be the genuine nugget in the overall misunderstanding that is this talk. But I think this is genuinely something that is good. This is one of the reasons why I should just decline the Hell Vouch thing to begin with. I usually think that I'm quick enough on my feet and in playing a frame game to get out of most sort of super aggressive attacks, but I don't think I really came into that discussion knowing my audience or really understanding what the heck I was doing. So I didn't really have a good idea of what I was trying to accomplish. And that's the number one way people lose debates, is not having an idea of what they're trying to accomplish. So something to consider.
Debunking is about correcting lies and putting arguments into context. It's very outwardly focused. And someone has made a claim before an audience, and you are trying to reach that audience before they are led astray, or maybe fortify others against the argument before they hear it. This definitionally needs to be done in public. You need as many people to hear you as possible. Persuasion is when you actually try to change the mind of the person who makes the claim. This can be a very tricky proposition depending on how far their beliefs are from yours. It is sensitive, delicate work that requires a much greater emphasis on the other person's feelings, and should almost always be done in private. So, debunking the right. If you are trying to debunk the right, something you must always keep in mind is this is not a debate. I've already said my piece on why debates are ineffective, and since you don't want to have one, as much as possible, a debunking should not involve the person being debunked. It is somewhat valuable to have dissenting comments under like an ableist magazine article. It is more valuable to write your own article.
This is true because they have the ability to write their own articles. And I think this opinion is emerging not because Ian Danskin here discovered it. It's emerging because the power has shifted to the point where this is basically, it's completely one-sided. A debate occurs when two parties of relatively equal footing come and want to exchange ideas. If this is just a cathedral, a general societal consensus cleaning up dissidents and heretics, then yeah, absolutely not. But why didn't the left come to this conclusion in the 60s? Well, it's because they didn't have total domination over the media, and if they did do this, there was some possibility that they might not be the ones to own the media in 10 years, and then they'd be building the apparatus to vindicate the left to come in and clean them up the right to come in and clean them up as heretics. I mean, they were just coming off of a Red Scare. And the Red Scare was the first time that these kind of tactics that Ian's talking about were used against the left. It was used against a very small number of people in Hollywood and in the general media circles, both in New York and on the West Coast. And even after that, we never hear the end of this. We never hear the end of this. And it's amazing. The left has not gotten over the Red Scare now 60 years after it happened. And it's amazing. They're really sore about this because it really sucks having essentially your own opinion deplatformed and not argued against, but hunted down. I mean, again, it's almost like democracy doesn't really work the way we were taught, right, guys?
I've also explained that you should avoid the rebuttal format. One of the reasons for that is this thing called the backfire effect, the tendency for rebuttals to make people believe the original argument even stronger. Essentially, if there's a lie that a person has heard many times, hearing it again, even in the context of having it disproven, reinforces the lie. Also, if a lie or misconception is core to someone's moral philosophy, proof that it's untrue will often make them cling all the more tightly to it, because their sense of self is being threatened. You've probably heard of that. That's cognitive dissonance.
Trans women are women?
Now, there's a decent amount of research into the backfire effect. There's also a decent amount of research that says despite repeated attempts, people couldn't verify that it even actually exists. So where and how it happens is still being figured out. But there are some best practices. Here's how every episode of the Alt-Right Playbook is structured. We begin with a hypothetical, based on an actual event or sometimes an amalgamation of a few, but with the details left out. That's so people have to focus on the thrust of the argument rather than nitpicking it.
Yeah, you totally successfully remove the details on this one, Ian. I never know the people you're referring to when you, quote-unquote, leave the details out of your alt-right playbooks. I mean, who is this weird blonde guy who assaulted a woman? I mean, God, it could be anybody. God, rack my mind. Like, bald, kind of orange skin, has an angry face on, so progressives might not like him. Oh, God, it's a mystery. Mystery, total mystery. This is a pure abstract case, guys. I have no idea who he's referring to.
This example is always framed through a progressive lens. Here is what literally happened, and here is a reasonable, appropriate response. Then we explain how conservatives or reactionaries enter that conversation and how their behavior is, from our perspective, sometimes baffling. And then we cover how the left tends to interpret the right and what our default responses tend to be. And then, only then, do we talk about what the right is actually doing and what they actually believe. The key here,
which is usually wrong. There was one thing when there was one alt-right playbook where they actually got something correct about the right. I was really kind of taken back because I'm so used to hearing things that I don't believe from Ian Danskin that the very one time he was like, the right wing believes that, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of do believe this. And I think it was something like the right believes in a social order, and they don't believe all people are created equal. What they think all people are created equal is that the government is not competent to sort people into social orders. And I think that is very accurate to what right-wingers believe. It's actually very accurate to what the founding fathers believed. But of course, I don't exactly know what the alternative is, because if I were to say that, well, progressives actually do believe all men are created equal and not just in a legal fiction sort of sense, Ben Burgess would hop out of the bushes behind my house and claim, this Tributist is straw-manning progressives because we don't believe in equality. But I mean, everyone knows that they teach it, whether or not they believe it. But I'm digressing, so I'm just going to hit the spacebar again.
Here is that we do not start with a bad argument and then explain why it's bad. We start with the truth. We should treat the truth as normal. We should establish the truth so strongly that by the time we get to the lie, the fact that it's a lie should be obvious. You frame the conversation from your perspective, not from theirs. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, you don't even need to acknowledge their perspective. You are allowed to talk about progressive tax policies without repeating whatever nonsense Jeff Sessions or Mike Pence said this week. Here's why debunking is important. In the pre-internet days,
that's where every progressive likes to have his political conversations at Thanksgiving dinner.
If your racist uncle said something messed up at dinner, there would be an awkward silence and everyone would shift in their chairs and eventually someone would change the subject.
This is also what would happen if your communist uncle said something like that as well. There's been a general coming apart, and most of the available data we have right now does not show conservatives and right-wingers largely driving that. You're right, there are a small group of distant right-wingers who've kind of broken off and taken leaps further out just to start questioning Enlightenment ideas. That's a thing that's happened. but it's not a mainstay. I mean, as much as I wish the dissident right was some kind of huge demographic force that caused America to lurch further to the right, aside from Trump's sort of Buchanan-esque populism, which is not, strictly speaking, any kind of right-wing idea, it's more or less just disillusion with neoconservatism. Aside from that, there's been no large demographic scale shift towards radically right ideas. But the same is just not true for the left. There's been a huge, since the second Obama term, there's been a huge sea change demographic shift where Democrats have become radically more left-wing. And people are trying to come up with all sorts of names for this. My favorite one is the Great Awakening. So we could say that in 2012, the progressive America, the descendants of the mainline Protestants, finally attained the Great Awakening. And so we're having progressivism come into its own as a new religion. This is the evangelical time for this ancestor of Protestant Christianity, mixed in with a fair amount of Marxism to boot. So, yeah, I mean, it's getting more divided. You don't get the size at the Thanksgiving kitchen table, but this has largely resulted in a bunch of left-wingers breaking off and sprinting far, far to the left, at least if we compare it to the 80s and 90s.
Your uncle might be a racist, but at least he knows in that moment no one agreed with him. The problem with that interaction happening online is no one knows whether the silence is awkward or not. If someone says something bigoted and no one acknowledges it, we don't see the shifting in the chairs. People will interpret that silence however they want. In fact, standard etiquette on the far right is to say awful things in such a way that different people have different reads on the silence. They want the people who disagree with them to think that they're just being edgy, that the reason no one is responding is because, of course, everyone disagrees, but they're just not going to feed the trolls. But the people who agree, they want them to think they're serious. And the reason no one's responding is because what they say is so self-evidently true.
Again, this is how gay rights, all sorts of left-wing movements, socialist movements, this is an element of what we might call culture jamming, where you take something that you're experimenting with and you present it in a funny way, and there's no appropriate way that or an innocuous way, and there's no appropriate way that a countercultural force or the consensus force can come in and censor you or apply disapproval to you because it's just a joke, bro. And the left used this all throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s to mainstream their ideas. I wish I could say that the right invented this. They just copy-pasted this from earlier progressive movements.
Bigotry relies on the assumption that every racist, sexist, and homophobe is in the silent majority. That the far-right troll is the only one who will say out loud what deep down everyone believes. This is why largely unmoderated forums like Reddit, NeoGAF, and Chan boards are a hotbed of recruitment for white nationalists and men's rights activists, places where the real bigots can blend in with the ironic ones. So one way to deal with the freedom to interpret silence is to remove silence. By speaking up, you disabuse people of the idea that everyone agrees with the bigot. You just have to be smart about it. You can't just tell the truth, you have to frame it properly. And you have to distance the bigot from the conversation as much as possible. If you want some actionable advice on how to do that, hang tight until I eventually make that video because I'm still figuring it out, sorry. Okay, so persuading the right. If you are trying to persuade a person on the right, you should first ask yourself 3 questions. 1, does this person know me? Are they a relative, colleague, classmate, friend? 2, does this person respect me? Are you a Twitter personality they admire? Are they a fan of your video essays? 3, do I have authority over this person? Do you outrank them at work, or do they post on a forum where you're a moderator? The more yeses you can give, the more reasons they have to listen to you. If you're someone they know, they might try.
So it's funny because I said this very same thing on my old Discord community always. I always said, you can't convince people unless you have authority, respect, or you engage with them through very, very simple questions and answers. And this is just, as the only real way to convince people is well, I guess the third way, and this is not really a way to convince people, but it's if you can tell stories. But if you don't have respect or authority, and they don't know, and a person's not interested in why you believe what you believe, it's very, very difficult to convince anybody. And this is just, I can't tell you how much of a mistake this has been for Christians in particular. Christians are just obsessed with this idiotic idea of arguing people into opinions. I saw so many Christian apologists just go down in front of Christians because they came to try to like read Thomas Aquinas's third cosmological argument for the existence of God, and then Christopher Hitchens just scoffed at them for 2 hours and called them idiots. And this is it's really, it sounds cynical, and to a certain degree it is, but all this is just the pre-Enlightenment correct view of how humans actually process conversations coming back into light. We learn from teachers, we learn from authority figures, we learn from people we respect, and we learn from observing the universe. We don't learn from anonymous people posting arguments to us, regardless of how structurally they're formatted to look like mathematical arguments. 99% of these stupid Ben Burgess style logical arguments going across the thing are all they are is just pseudo mathematics, right? They're not actually real mathematics, because in mathematics the most important thing is to have formalized definitions, and most of the time these things operate on objects that are not formally defined. I have to say, though, theologians and metaphysicians tend to be a little bit better about this stuff, so I don't want to put down people who are genuinely interested in trying to operate formal language on objects like God and ethics and stuff like that, if you're really, really doing honest analytical philosophy. But in the ordinary operating Lincoln Douglas style conversations that we have in real life, these formatted conversations where you call out fallacies and you structure it using facts and reason, it's basically you're just copying a form from mathematics and hoping that people will take that form from you. People don't usually learn that way. The reason why you believe the Pythagorean theorem, most people, is because their teacher, who they considered an authority, told them it was true. Very few people who believe the Pythagorean theorem is true could write out a proof for the Pythagorean theorem. So they believe it basically on authority. And if you go to most of the things you believe, you'll realize that most of them are believed because of authority, not because you heard an argument. And that's just a fact of human existence. So why should we believe that in politics and in cultural war issues, this great general rule that we can physically observe in our own minds is suddenly going to have a great exception? Well, there's no reason to believe that. The reason to believe that is if we don't believe that, then democracy doesn't work. Or doesn't work the way that we've been encouraged by people like Mill and other progressive liberal philosophers of the 20th century want us to believe democracy works, or Karl Popper, or any of these other liberal people who believe in like an open society of types. People aren't convinced by arguments; they're convinced by being taught, and by being taught by teachers, and coming in contact with stories or interactions with people they respect. If someone respects you, but they're not an authority over them, like a parent would be a perfect example, don't argue with your parents. I'm totally guilty of arguing with my parents. I should never do it. Ask questions. Ask questions and tell them stories. I guess it was like this when you were a kid, Mom and Dad. But let me tell you how it's like now that our town looks like it does right now. Let me tell you how hard it is to get a job in an environment where people consider a bachelor's degree in computer science to be too minimal for an entry-level position. Let me tell you how it is trying to buy a house in a state that seems to be designed only as a retirement community for the ultra-rich. Maybe in your childhood, Marin County was just a place that anyone could live. It's not like that story will mean more to them than some kind of Stefan Molyneux argument. I guarantee you. And then ask questions. But that's the only way you're going to convince people. You're not going to convince them through the argument channel. That's a mythology of the Enlightenment.
trust you. If you're someone they respect, they might want to be more like you. If you're someone with authority, they might worry about repercussions if they don't listen. If you are none of those things, what are you? You're a stranger on the internet. Though we often assume otherwise, people don't act solely in their self-interest, they act on their beliefs. People don't only support far-right policies because they have been lied to. They do it because, right or wrong, they believe in something. And part of being a human is having your beliefs change over time, but ask yourself, how many times have your core beliefs changed because of a conversation with a stranger on the internet? Myself, I like talking to strangers online, but how productive that conversation is depends on how closely aligned our beliefs are. If I talk to you about where we should set the marginal tax rate, that may be a good conversation if we have the same base assumptions about the role of taxes in society. But if I talk to someone on the right and they don't share my base assumption that governments should collect taxes to pay for government services and public well-being, then I may think we're talking about the most efficient tax rate, but we're actually talking about whether all taxation is theft. And I'm going to have to play detective just to figure out where our beliefs even diverge. We're dealing with a much more fundamental belief, and those beliefs are the ones that don't shift quickly. To move someone politically, you have to be in a position to move them, and most strangers on the internet aren't. Always remember, there are minds that can be changed, and there are minds that can't, and there are minds that can be changed but not by you. Not learning the difference is a massive waste of energy.
This is actually a golden nugget. I mean, by all means. We're kind of unlearning the Enlightenment here, but let's keep on going.
Another unfortunate thing you have to ask yourself before engaging is this person a danger to anyone? Something that had to be explained to me is that a common way for people to vent their frustrations online about minority politics is to harass the various icons of those politics. They often don't even view this as harassment because they're thinking of these folks, usually women and people of color, as concepts, not people. And if you get this person all riled up about women in video games, they may not go after you, but they may still go after someone.
Well, if they're going after icons of religious media, Ian, isn't that what the left calls punching up? I mean, getting an angry Twitter message at a politician, or what is this, Rachel Maddow? I mean, I don't know. I thought you were supposed to be able to punch up. I guess throwing milkshakes at politicians, I've heard half of the left essentially said that was perfectly fine. Angry tweets, not so fine, I guess. I don't know.
But if everything checks out, if you are in a position to reach them, and you know that they are not the harassing type, or the type that hangs out with harassing types, maybe then's the time to break out the empathy. It's going to be a private conversation. It's probably going to take a lot of time, and it's going to be a lot of unpaid emotional labor. But if you've got the mana for it, it is...
Oh, emotional labor. How many times... You're forcing me to do emotional labor. You're forcing me to do emotional labor. I should have said that to Vaush when I was on this stream. Oh my God, Vaush, calling me racist just forces me to do so much emotional labor. You're forcing me to do emotional labor for you. It's the whiniest thing. I mean, we're all on here discussing ideas and yelling at each other, presumably because we find that the amount of truth and edification we get out of it is more than the humiliation and anger that it generates. I mean, no one's forcing us to do this. This is our hobby, right? I even feel guilty about collecting money for the stuff that I do. I mean, even if no one had given to my subscribe star, I still would have made that video against Ben Burgess. I mean, this is a hobby for me. I like doing this. It's not labor. I mean, it's just the only reason why we're doing this is so people can talk about it in terms of like this Marxist notion that somehow by talking to right wingers online, you're kind of they're forcing themselves on you. They're stealing your labor and your time and your life essence. I mean, it's the most self-pitying thing I can think of.
Worth doing. Now, if you have that conversation and you use all the knowledge and sensitivity in the world and it seems like the person still isn't changed, don't completely lose hope. Maybe they're too far gone, but also shifting a core belief is almost never an event. It's a process. Accepting that beliefs they've held for years might be harmful, or recognizing that icon of social politics is actually a living, breathing human being, those things take many points of contact. say for the sake of argument, it's 100 points of contact. Maybe you were just number 35. 35 is just as important as 99, it's just not as satisfying. So take your ego out of it, set aside your desire to win an argument, just do what you can and move on.
And this is, for us, this is good advice. I mean, I'm making fun of the words that Ian's using because he's portraying these idiotic progressive ideas that aren't these ones. But insofar as he's talking about dialectic, he's absolutely right. These kind of conversations where we approach people with empathy and kind of move things forward very, very slowly they're so quintessential for the right to do. Constantly, day in and day out, we have to constantly be engaging, constantly be moved forward, constantly engage with progressives. Always talk about the terms of the debate that are currently being discussed. And that's how you move the conversation forward. Because the left does not want to have a conversation anymore on any terms that are completely controlled by its own narrative. And this is just people have to keep in mind. It's good advice.
Finally, a quick question. What are the places in the U.S. where citizens don't have full voting rights? Prisons, D.C., the territories, Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, the Mariana and Virgin Islands. What do all these places have in common? Well, they're all places Republicans really don't want to give the vote to, and they're all majority non-white. So please, keep it in perspective. If a fraction of the effort spent having Facebook arguments with Republicans was spent on combating voter suppression, gerrymandering, and ex-con disenfranchisement, and on statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico, we wouldn't need to talk to the right very often.
This is called the beat 'em with demographics. And this is this is again what this is really about too. I say a lot about this is the reason why this conversation is happening in the way of the burn the heretic mode and not the how do we engage people in the Jeffersonian Socratic method is because the left understands that the demographics are going to give them this country to begin with. Now the question is exactly what can a right demand against a reigning democratic coalition that has essentially total supremacy. And that's going to be interesting because I think what's going to happen is they're going to get a unbeatable political coalition. And what the right should lobby for is the illegalization of the Republican Party and the conversion of America into a one-party state. Because at that point, it will be a one-party state due to the demographics. And it's better to have that reality formalized than it is to have it operate informally behind the scenes. This is again, by the way, guys, this is an original idea. I'm copy pasting this from Molebug. You could get this, right? You could get it, the more democratic power is formalized in California, the more reality and need there is for a countercultural reactionary force to spring up from the ground. Now in California, it's much harder because of the fact that everyone has to be running they basically have to be running just to make enough money to stand still and buy a house. But in other states, this is going to be a lot different. In another state like Montana, you guys will have the demographics, you'll have land, you still have money from the oil industry, but at the same time, you'll have a national politics that you functionally never can make any decision on whatsoever. They abolished the electoral college. They abolished the electoral college. They federalize everything, which they want to do anyway, right? Because they're going to centralize the power up. And they make Puerto Rico and Washington D.C. states. The Congress will be Democratic forever, and the presidency will be Democratic forever, and the federal government will be totally ruled by a party that you have no say in, and that is thousands of miles away. Fertile ground for an actual dissident right movement to come up and propose something new and radical, and to propose new forms that can exist in these spaces that exist in massive, massive dissent and dissatisfaction with how this country is being ruled. So, he doesn't know this, but he's kind of laying out both the success and the doom of his very species of white progressive. The other person that won't be needed when Puerto Rico and Guam and all prisoners get voting rights. Do you know what the Democrats won't need? They won't need shitty white progressives that do shitty YouTube videos that only other white progressives watch. Believe me, black and Puerto Rican people don't look at Mr. Ian Danskin here and go, boy, that just looks like our leader. We need to listen to him. No, of course not, right? And so there's going to be a certain amount of contempt about why why these white people... The only reason why white people are even entertained in the Democratic Party to begin with is the fact that they need to make sure that the Republicans don't win. The second that group doesn't exist anymore, or they're so disconnected that they don't have any input, they become useless to their very own ruling coalition. And then they will start to bleed away, and the inevitable collapse of the Democratic coalition will come about, and subsequently we might expect the cathedral could also partially collapse in on itself. Who knows what's going to happen after that, but it'll be interesting.
Millennials are one of the most progressive generations in history. The Republican base is dwindling, and they know it. The only Republican president to win the popular vote since the 80s was George W.'s re-election, and if the popular vote counted for anything, he wouldn't have been up for re-election in the first place. Which means if not for gaming the Electoral College, we wouldn't have had a Republican in the White House in over 25 years. The only way the right stays in power is by making themselves disproportionately represented. Fix that, and we can make the world better without their permission. Does that mean don't talk to them?
Why would you talk to them if you have power over them? I mean, this is just, again, the death of the Enlightenment in 3 slides. You just saw it. You can just get raw political power over a minority population that has no say and that you have contempt for, and then just rule without any of their input. How simple.
Of course not. I don't really believe in fighting the good fight on only one front. The minds that can be changed need to be changed. The minds that can't be changed need to be outnumbered, and the voices that aren't being represented need to be elevated. We need all of it. But it can feel antithetical to liberal values to say, look, this is the direction the country needs to go. You can either get on board or be left behind.
Because it is.
It can seem downright undemocratic to drag people into a world they don't want.
Well, it's not undemocratic, but it's against the spirit that there's going to be a division of power, and you shouldn't be able to just completely disenfranchise large minority populations that occupy geographically distinct areas because you are able to bring in a bunch of very, very highly dense voting blocks that historically didn't live in the region of this continent. I mean, that's not how democracy was ever supposed to work. And if it was supposed to work that way, then why did we ever go away from monarchies? It's basically just monarchy with more steps involved, because you're gaming the media system in order to move over to Innuendo. You're gaming the immigration to get the demographic populations you want in to vote. And then who cares about the conversations? If the conversations leave, then why the hell do we even care about democracy? The only reason why we want democracy to begin with is so we could have dialectic conversations over policy positions. It makes absolutely no sense, but oh well, who cares? Leave them behind. This is what they're leaving behind right here is the entire justification for democracy or any Enlightenment values to begin with. Once you leave behind debate and dialectic, then why even have a democracy? If it's just going to be decided by the people who control our immigration policy and how the media runs, why even bother?
Though I will point out the right has no qualms doing it to us. All I can say is that people are adaptable. Look at how many people screamed bloody murder about how Obamacare was going to lead to a socialist revolution, and now gutting it is one of the most unpopular moves Congress has ever made. If you make the world better around people, they will get used to it.
If you get people addicted to heroin, they'll fight you when you try to take it off.
White people didn't learn that saying the N-word was transgressive because we sat down every white person one by one and convinced them. They just realized that saying it would make people think they're assholes.
And fired them for it. That's another reason. I mean, why even have conversations? Just ban ideas outright. I mean, come on. It just... There's no reason to have a discussion in this framework, period. Oh, what happened there?
And much as we'd like to believe the desire to do good is a strong motivator, an even stronger one is the desire to not be thought an asshole. So everyone on some level feels this pressure to be normal, to be acceptable. In fact, the right feels this even more strongly than the left. And maybe shouldn't surprise us that the party that stumps for the status quo would be the most invested in being the status quo. And when somebody gets the sense that something they thought they should hate is broadly accepted, or something that used to be taboo, something that they used to do is now taboo, most of them will shut their mouths as quickly as possible. It may not change their minds, but it can change their behavior. Now you must be thinking, Ian, that's not true. This whole situation today is a backlash against the first black president. And yes, it is. But that story can be misleading because when norms change, the people who go along with it do so quietly. The people who plant their feet and push back do so as loudly as possible.
And that's a mistake that we've made. The people who plant their feet should not be loud in the way that people have been being loud. This needs to change. And if that changes, this whole strategy will cease to work.
The far right knows that the political mainstreaming of a black man, a woman, and a Jewish class warrior is bad for them. And they are trying to reassert their definition of status quo. Because if they can bring casual bigotry back as a social norm, all those people who quietly drifted away when it seemed taboo will quietly drift back. And bringing back old norms is what Make America Great Again means. So please, do the work of changing minds, but do the other work as well. It's all part of the way forward. That's what I got.
Okay, well, that's fine, because I need to answer super chats anyway. So in conclusion, Ian Danskin explained why the Enlightenment never was a thing. It was all a big game. We control the media and the demographic buttons, so why even have conversations? But if we're not having conversations and we're controlling everything through framing and demographic work, then what are we measuring when we measure the polls? How effective the media was at controlling the narrative? How effective demographers were, people into demographic gaming were bringing in the right populations? Yeah, I guess so. But then why even have a conversation? Now, guys, I need to get another glass of water, but I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Don't like dead air, but what can you do? All right, time to answer the chats. Let's just go through the super chats, answer some of them. Oh, that was a very, I mean, I'll say this, that's a very interesting talk. I mean, it was, I guess I just don't understand how the left doesn't see this. This is, they're basically saying democracy doesn't matter. I mean, the question is, why did people want democracy to work in the first place? I guess it just, is it I guess it must be just a magical faith thing that they like the form that democracy works through. I don't know. This is, again, I think why the postmodern revolution is just fundamentally a reactionary one. It was spearheaded by leftists that didn't even know what tools they were dealing with. And the next steps can only be taken forward by people who want to go back to authors like Machiavelli and Thomas Aquinas or earlier medieval philosophers, and even Frederick the Great, who was, a famous opponent of Machiavelli. And we need to kind of reanalyze the Enlightenment from these perspectives, that didn't win going into the late 19th century. And I think at that point we'll understand exactly what this postmodern revolution means. Because this talk that we just looked at by Ian Danskin, I mean, this is mostly true stuff. The problem is he just doesn't realize the full implications of what he's even talking about. The full implications is democracy is meaningless. We have power now. You're going to bend the knee. Bend the knee is the message he has for the right. Okay, well, fine, but that doesn't mean that's not what we were sold when we bought into this democracy thing. Now, I don't think that the left can escape from this for indefinitely. I know they think they can, largely because they control the academy. Okay, let's go through the super chats now. Where's the first one? Jared Roberts for $5, just a straight up donation. Well, thank you very much. $5 from Pragmatic Culture. Cornelia Zelau Corneliu was a Roman Catholic fascist. Wrote, "For my legionnaires, good stuff." Well, it's interesting. It sounds just the stuff that Mark Citadel is interested in. I steer clear of the early 20th century stuff whenever I can, with the one exception perhaps of Oswald Spengler. I don't know. It's no one's ever, even if it has the best ideas in it ever, even if it has like really, really interesting things to say, nobody in any reasonable distance from the cathedral is going to ever consider it legitimate because it's Hitler. And I mean, it's legitimate. I mean, Hitler was insane. he was this person who's obsessed with exterminating one race in particular, and doing all sorts of idiotic ideas to create, a Germany that can never even conceivably exist. And in the meantime, he let the Germany that did exist get crushed under the tank treads of the Red Army. I don't think that's not responsible leadership. That's insane, and putting your own people at risk so you can murder other people is, I don't know if there's a better definition of insanity than that. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there were some good thinkers among them, and I'm sure Mark Citadel would be able to tell me a lot about this individual, but I tend to steer away. Amazon Lord of the Rings series, they have to ruin everything. What is so I don't know, guys. Amazon Lord of the Rings, I've heard that this is the thing. What are they doing? Are they like diversifying it? I mean, that would be kind of funny. I almost hope they kind of are diversifying it, right? But anyway, I can see this train wreck coming. I guess at least we know this. At least we know that Lord of the Rings has a cathartic ending. You're not going to get to the end and just have Frodo murder everyone after becoming a 7th level assassin in the Assassin Academy and spending all his experience points into the ninja skills like Arya Stark did in the last season of Game of Thrones. £5 for Forward Synthesis says, fully automated luxury distributism, 3 acres and a robot. Well, maybe. I don't fully automated luxury X is not a formula I like. Humans need to work and see the fruits of their efforts in their work. That's how we I'll borrow this from Karl Marx. This is something that he did have. This is a nugget and I don't think it's original to Marx, but very little in Marx was. This is something that I think he had right, was that human beings do need to work and do need to see their efforts reflected in their work in order to not feel alienated from their own lives. Fully automated luxury anything just sounds like the community of people in WALL-E. It's disgusting. MJR Schneider says, for $5, says anti-intellectualism does us no good. The Academy has always been the source for the intellectual status quo, and we shouldn't exclude ourselves from it. Yeah, I'm not, I don't like academics, but I kind of am academic. I don't like to call myself an intellectual, because I think that's pretentious, and it just seems to be putting on airs. But I'm not eschewing the academy. I spent so much time getting education that I can't even tell you I'm way overeducated. And I'm not excluding myself from the academy. I'm like, oh no, Princeton invited me to give a talk about my YouTube career as a reactionary, and I said, no way, you're too liberal for me. No way, I'm going to Princeton. I'm not excluding myself from it. They're excluding me from it. The power relation just isn't in that direction. If colleges want to invite dissident right thinkers on for discussion, I mean, that's the goal. We could guilt them into doing that, but we're not the ones that are excluding ourselves from this arrangement. My point was that so for $2, Lucid Dreamer, my point was that I can match his moral argument. Is this the personal political thing? I don't know how to reply to this. Okay, so I guess he's saying that he can match the moral argument for universal health care. My health shouldn't be up for a vote, or my health shouldn't be negotiated by cost-benefit analysis. Well, I mean, like, if you're a leader, everything is cost-benefit analysis. So ultimately, that's not true. If you're a soldier, your life is up to cost-benefit analysis. I mean, that's just the harsh reality we live in. Now, if we want to say that a certain amount of major medical is a priority spending for our country, and this has to be fulfilled before all non-essential activities like roads or anything that isn't defending this country from invaders, then maybe that's something that we take off the table. But if you're going to invite citizens to become leaders through the electoral process, you can't then go back and wag your finger at them when they do what all responsible leaders do and try to do a cost-benefit analysis about what the benefits versus the trade-offs are for some given healthcare policy over the other. I mean, that just seems like inviting someone to take a drink and then slapping him in the face because you shouldn't drink. It's just disingenuous, and this is the whole slimy thing about this progressive new woke attitude towards how all previous Enlightenment ideas are just a bunch of bullshit. I mean, none of their... It's just basically... the entire idea of democracy just becomes a big switcheroo and a joke at the expense of the original population that swallowed it. Do the new people who are voting in the system realize that the leaders can just abolish them and bring in a new population whenever it suits the elites and those who control the media? Is that what they're signing up for? I mean, I don't know. I mean, if they knew, if that's what they were going to sign up for going forward into the future, I think very few people would want that. I think what all people want is they want to have a leadership that feels like they have a stake in their individual people. And that's not, and they're not just gaming the system to bring in whoever and whatever will give the elites the kind of votes that they want. Okay, so where are we in this whole thing? Okay. Pardon for that pause. $2 River runs as empathy is for weenies. I don't like the word empathy. I'm not gonna lie. It's sort of, there's a certain amount of bullcrap associated with it. And it's a buzzword. What can I say about it? But it's a tool. If the left is leaving behind empathy, I know what empathy is in practice. I know what the left does when they say they're doing empathy. And if they're leaving that weapon behind because their coalition can no longer sustain it, we have to pick it up and figure out how we can use it. We're not buying thoroughbreds here, people. We're playing Moneyball. And so if there's a useful tool that goes up on market because the big players who own the media corporations can't use it anymore, the question is, can we use it for our causes? And I think empathy is a practice that can be used for the general right-wing cause. How do we deal with... Okay, for $2 Dreadnought, this is the question of the night. I can't emphasize how important this is. Dreadnought, how do we deal with the scoffers? Or with scoffers? This is essentially the attitude that people like Chapo Trap House take, that you see from people like Vaush, and most of the people on LeftTube. But it's just, how do we deal with it? Well, this is interesting because it kind of gets to how this video went, right? And so this video, initially I was like, okay, I'm going to make a quick video response to Ben Burgess, just detailing like how he misrepresented what I said, which is like really, that's the first part of the video, which is really dry. Of course, I couldn't make it short because I'm constitutionally incapable of making short videos, apparently. And also because, Ben Burgess, he lays out enough shit that I have to like respond to a lot of different things and demonstrate why it's wrong, why, we can't just let communism escape into vagueness and have that be acceptable. And so, yeah, at the end of listening to this video, I'm like, this is dry, this is terrible. And I'm playing Ben Burgess's game. Ben Burgess could just then go and nitpick this video for the one part, some out of context quote, and complain that I'm astonishingly ignorant, blah, 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 and then scoff, 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 and the game repeats again. So I'm like, well, I really need to talk about my emotional reasons for disliking Ben Burgess's argument. What I was trying to communicate with the Magical Word series that didn't get communicated, in addition to my visceral emotional issues with Marxism, with the reincarnation of Marxism, given that the 20th century existed. So that was the second attempt, and after that I was like, well, you can scoff at this, right? Because you can scoff at this because in being emotional, when you're emotional and when you're doing this is what I believe, and very self-righteous like I was in the second part, you open yourself up to hypocrisy, you open yourself up to justified accusations of hypocrisy because you're operating in a mode of wrath, right? You're operating in a mode of looking at the opponent's flaws and not seeing your own, so you can get scoffed that way. And then you're also kind of opening yourself up to accusations of being disingenuous and not a good faith actor, which I'm pretty sure Ben probably will watch the first two parts and then find some reason to never talk to me again if I understand our relationship properly. But the third part was me saying, okay, look, I'm going to be as honest as possible with my own faults and my motivations for making this video, and my failures in making this video, and so nobody could watch the third part and say that I'm not just all my cards are totally on the table, and that's sort of the answer to Dreadnought's question: how do we defeat the scoffers? You can't scoff at a confession that's sincere. If you lay all your chips on the table with no deception there, and this is my sincere opinion, here it is. If they're scoffing, they got to stop scoffing. Now, that's a very vulnerable position to be in, because you're not in a position to strike against a political opponent in that regard. And I wouldn't recommend it as a general posture because it also is emotionally draining. I don't want to seem like I'm copying the emotional labor of the left, but it does take a lot out of you, and you can't go into attack dog mode right afterwards, right? But if you're getting to a point where it's just scoff, cynical, power, you have to reach deeper and reach for spirituality and honesty and truth. And like I said in the video, I think the only truth is just to come out, be honest about your flaws, and then I think people will listen to that and they'll understand that scoffing is fundamentally easier and less honest than being sincere. And it's hard because, this is the thing with YouTube. I listened to that third part and I'm like, this doesn't sound sincere. And it wasn't because I was reading off of script. I read it very sincerely when I wrote it down. But then, the camera turns on, you're looking into the little thing to make sure that you're in frame. You're reading off of a script because you can't deviate at all because the other person has to be re-recorded responding to you. And it feels a little scripted. So I'm not so sure that the ContraPoints method is worthwhile. But it was something that I just wanted to try once to see if it would get through to anyone. It's totally experimental. But I think very, very long answer, sincerity, honestly used beats cynical scoffing. Australian $5. Why do you think demographics will shift a country into a one-party state? The right wing will simply shift further leftwards. This is from Technogema. Yeah, that's the danger. What the Democratic Party wants is a Republican Party that shifts as fast as the demographics of this country do, so that they're always on the right side of the Democrats, but always moving to the left. That's what will help them. And that's what the dissident right has to stop. The Republican Party dies where it stands. It does not shift to the left. And the mainstay of our political efforts, not meta-political efforts, not spiritual efforts, not cultural efforts, but our mainstay of our efforts in the sort of more or less meaningless contemporary election politics has to be to utterly obliterate the moderate Republican Party, like as embodied by people like David Brooks and other people who want to, over to Windows, shift the entire Republican Party to the left in order to cover the Democrats' ass as they adjusted the demographics of this country. The Republican Party stays where it is, and the demographic coalition splits apart. That's the appropriate way to play this. That's the only way that a right wing can attain a political achievement in the next 50 years that I can see. If the entire apparatus moves and you co-own all of the shitty decisions, and if the right co-owns all of the shitty decisions the Democrats made, then, I mean, what's the point of doing politics at all? Tien Zhao, for $5, thank you very much for your contribution. If the leftists shut righties out of power and use the state to do so, does terrorism become an acceptable form of discourse against state power? Well, I mean, no. And this is kind of a weird question because I couldn't possibly say yes, otherwise I'd lose my YouTube channel. But no. I don't know. I mean, like, what has terrorism ever achieved? I mean, maybe there's been some kind of like terror. I mean, maybe in the Battle of Algiers. That's the one instance that I can think of where like terrorism actually achieved something. But Molebug is right. The reason why terrorism or passive resistance or any of these third world liberation movements ever worked was because they had political sympathizers inside the cathedral working with them to obtain the political end of ending imperialism, which I totally agree with. We should have ended imperialism, but we can't copy pasta off third world movements. Go, political terrorism worked for them, it worked for us. I mean, we've seen right-wing political terrorism. Did anyone felt like that particularly worked for people? I didn't feel like. I mean, I'm against violence on moral grounds, but I'll make the obvious point that it obviously didn't work. It did the exact opposite. I mean, I know what winning feels like. That didn't fucking feel like winning. I mean, it was also horrific human tragedies as well, but I assume everyone here knows that, so I don't have to emphasize that particular portion of it when I'm talking. I mean, it's also just morally wrong by God's law to kill people for no proportional reason. It does not meet just war theory standards. I mean, if we could find an effective way to do civil resistance the way Gandhi did by developing a sympathetic branch of the Democratic Party, then I think you'd have... and that could happen. Like, if the Democratic Party... The ideal thing is the Republican Party dies, the Democratic Party fractures and goes into civil war. And then part of the Democratic Party makes a deal with the former Republican Party to give them concessions in order for them to destroy the wing that is more hostile to right-wingers in this country. And that's a way back into... that's essentially a way to capsize the cathedral, call a bankruptcy, and re-elect new leadership. That could solve short-term problems. But then come in the long-term problems with how you deal with modernity and overconsumption and the fact that human beings can't sustain luxury and decadence at the levels that they have already. And that's a separate issue. But, I mean, one disaster at a time, people, right? I think I'm going to end this in 15 minutes at 10:55. I'm getting quite tired and a little dehydrated. It's one of these nights, no amount of water is really compensating for things. Maybe I'll just answer general chats. Last super chats, please, guys, at 10:50, if you will. Terrorism achieved the destruction of the Isilon Republic. What the heck is the Isilon Republic? Is this a science fiction thing? I don't know. I mean, I'm too much on Molebug on this one. These sort of political public stunts, peaceful or violent, always rely on having moneyed interests that are sympathetic in positions of power, in a legislator, or in the larger power structure. Without those sponsors, the effort's more or less doomed. Some people are calling me boomer. Yeah, of course, because only a boomer could be tired after a 2-hour live stream. That's how you know that I'm. Although, I do feel like I'm kind of becoming a little bit of a dad here. There's a point in your life where you stop feeling like a spring chicken, and I think I've passed that line most definitely. Dreadnought for $2. Thanks, Distributist. I think you're right. Yeah, I don't exactly know how we're going to do it, but we have to start experimenting with new things. And, yeah. Art is going to be a new thing. You know, Millennial Woes, a while back, he was talking about how he didn't want to do political stuff anymore. He wanted to do art stuff. And I told him flat out, I'm like, why don't you just do art stuff? I mean, you're not making videos anyway. Why don't you just do abstract art? And they'll look, well, the movement. Well, the movement he's part of is dead. And it's been dead for, well, since what, a year and a half since Charlottesville? I mean, it's ridiculously dead. No one's moving forward in this particular vein. No one's creating a mass movement of that variety. Why don't you just create abstract art? I mean, creating the abstract art will make you feel more human and more alive. And I think the fans will like it, I think, more than just giving them the same stuff over and over again. I mean, this Ben Burgess thing, I don't expect it to be popular. I released it on a day that probably the absolute minimal amount of people who want to see it will see it. But I wanted to experiment with what it was, fully knowing that it was, at least one of the 3 parts was deeply flawed. But I just wanted to see what would happen if I published it, because I wanted to get the information and the experience testing sort of the bounds of what I had done before. And this is important. I'm going to release probably a better video on democracy that's going to be much more the classic distributist lecture. And then I'm going to do probably an even crappier video on Game of Thrones, which will be popular because it has the word Game of Thrones in it. Haha. And apparently anything that has Game of Thrones in it immediately gets you like a huge number of views. And they'll all be angry at me for not reading the books as thoroughly as Ben Burgess wants me to read Das Kapital Volume 1. Apparently in the original German, if you can possibly manage it, or whatever language George R. R. Martin wrote the original Song of Ice and Fire in. Yeah, but that's I have just lost my train of thought. But yeah, the thing is that those videos will be probably popular and perhaps even more useful. But they were not going to really test my boundaries for what I've done before. And that's something that I'm sort of interested in doing that. I want to see, maybe I should do more face videos. I don't know what people think. People like seeing my face in videos. Sometimes I think it's kind of good that I don't show my face, because it kind of puts the ideas front and center, which I always want to be center, and I always want those ideas to be central, not my face. And to be quite honest, it's very hard for me to do takes where I'm not stuttering. You can listen to me right now, I'm stuttering all over the place, and that kind of makes a disjointed video when it's not of the variety of a live stream where you're expecting to hear that stuff. But I still think that maybe I should do more things like dialogues in the variety that I did in the third part of that video. 24-hour Dave stream when I want to do a fundraiser. I will do a 24-hour Dave stream when I think I can raise enough money as H Bomber Guy raised for that mermaids charity. I want to raise that much money and give it to an organization that actually helps children. That actually makes it, something for like cystic fibrosis or something like that. That they need money. I like to say, are you ever going to draw any more comics? I really like your drawings. I drew 2 comics. They were both crap. They're both on my original Distributist blog, and they took so long. I kind of like drawing. My wife does drawing. I never was able to master the thick line comic style. And because of that, they all look super amateurish. But I don't know. It just, whenever you see a project where you're like, this thing is going to cost me 3 or 4 videos to do. You know, it's just, if you don't do it you have a job, you have family life, you're like, okay, well, I guess I just won't do videos for the next 6 weeks and then do this comic instead. And it's going to look like shit because, actually, no, I'll answer this question. If I could find someone to draw the comic for me, I'd write a comic like Friended, Adam from Friended. That would be great. I was my dream to write a comic. That would be perfect. I want a review of The Last Jedi. Will pay $2 Dreadnought. Well, what? What do you want me to say about that epic turd that hasn't already been said? This is the problem with Game of Thrones, is that I coming to the kill like 2 weeks later. I'm ordinarily you come to do a review 2 weeks after something has happened, and it's usually there's, you watch a review here and there, and then you're like, well, there's probably something that's still kind of like hasn't been devoured by the predators that brought this kill down when it was released 2 weeks ago. But in terms of Game of Thrones, this kill has been thoroughly devoured. The bones have been chewed clean by vultures. The bones are bleached, desiccated, and the marrow has been sucked out by vultures. There's almost nothing that can be that's fresh to take off this thing anymore. And The Last Jedi, I kind of want to do a meta review, what is. I kind of want to do a retrospective on Disney Star Wars when the sequel to The Last Jedi comes out. That's my promise, actually, Dreadnought. This is what I'll tell you. I'll give you a retrospective of the entire Disney phenomenon of Disney Star Wars after the third one comes out. I think I can do that one and say something original about the entire thing. But, what am I going to point out? Oh, the Mary Poppins scene with Leia force willing herself back into the ship from the vacuum of space was stupid. I mean, I don't know how many jokes can you make on that. I feel like they're all been done. But, the Iron Duke asked, what's the Iron Duke? Did I miss the super chat? Is there someone called the Iron Duke here? Well, there is, but I can't see him at distributisting me, so. Oh, your views on the burning of Notre Dame Cathedral in France? Arson? Related to the many church burnings in France? What is the story to that? It's been a month, hasn't it? I mean, they're like, oh, well, it was a mishap from the construction crew. But that didn't seem right. They had all these safeguards in place. I don't know. I mean, I agree with Blonde in the Belly of the Beast. Even if it is an arson, the French government will cover it up and we'll never know. Oh, okay, so Dreadnought. I'm sorry you had to pay $2 for that. Hey, Dreadnought, reply me some other question and I'll answer for your $2. The French government is notorious for hiding things from people. That it doesn't think that the hoi polloi have a right to know. They're incredibly reactionary in that dimension. They don't even allow you to publish racial statistics. So if this turns out to be an arson by a Muslim, they're going to bury this thing like, I don't know, 2-day-old croissants. I mean, there's no way these are ever going to see the light of day. I don't know. Maybe we could get we might know the truth in a little bit, but I guess I'm kind of interested in what the official explanation is, right? I guess the news cycle changed and everyone forgot about this? I guess everyone saw the inside of the cathedral. They realized that the cathedral was still standing, and they're like, okay, well, this is just a reconstruction project. But I just don't think, if this is anything that's not flattering to the Macron government, we will never know about it short of a Le Pen victory. And it's very likely that either an incompetence mix-up or a genuine arson, something in between that spectrum is very, very embarrassing to the Macron government. They will try to cover it up or just try to bury it and never talk about it again. And then just do a quick restoration and then just hope that shuts up the traditionalists. Yeah, I'd be scared of the French hoi polloi too. Well, I think France is a vector for a reactionary resurgence. I think that people underestimate that. The reaction needs to start somewhere in France. The Enlightenment began in a very real way. I know it began in America, like as a real political phenomenon, but in another real way, it began in France, and maybe the counter Enlightenment can begin in France as well. I think this is something that someone's reading my comics. Oh my god, they're terrible, guys. They're terrible. Don't read them. I wasn't taking blogging seriously when I made those comics, and they're way too time consuming for anybody. What do you think of the Fallout series? Boring? This is the one where this is like the Bethesda game, right? Where like you choose all your different endings. I guess that's kind of interesting. I mean, I like post-apocalyptic stuff, but I don't know. I mean, I played the last game I played was BioShock Infinite, which I still need to do a video on. And God, these things you have to do, they pile up like dirty dishes. They really do. Pardon me. I guess my reaction to Fallout, I think New Vegas was the one I remembered, was it kind of had some interesting ideas, but it never really developed them. They kind of were like interesting ideas just in the abstract. Kind of like first year philosophy thought experiments. Like, okay, you've got like a bureaucratic, like kind of EU thing, and then NCR, and then you've got like the reactionary Caesar's Legion type deal, and then you have, a variety of other contenders for power. I don't know. I mean, again, this is the thing with anime, like in just generally are the problems with media in the 21st century. Talking about an interesting idea is not the same thing as actually having an interesting opinion or an interesting idea itself. So just referencing the idea of an interesting opinion, like most modern media does, is you just talk about it and then you never say anything, and your media just falls super flat. Actually, I kind of like the Star Trek series because even though it was essentially liberal progressive propaganda, it was honest about the fact that it had an opinion about what the fate of the human race should be. Yep, the comics are terrible and don't read them. I mean, read them if you want to, but they're not anything serious. They're obviously amateurish. And they're drawn at a time where I was just doodling, and I don't really know how to draw comics anyway. So I am actually going to end it here. Did Dreadnought? Oh, okay, so the question Dreadnought asked in replacement of the Macron question was the Fallout game, the Fallout series. I mean, I like the idea. Guys, this is the question I have. Like, why isn't there a really good reactionary art that's post-apocalyptic? Reactionary art's post-apocalyptic art's naturally reactionary. Cyberpunk is naturally reactionary. Hard-boiled detective fiction is naturally reactionary. Pulp fiction's naturally reactionary. I mean, all of these things are just bonanzas for the reactionary mind and the counter-enlightenment mind just to expand into. There's so many opportunities here to write good, fresh fiction in the light of all this crap that's coming out. I mean, to me, Fallout just feels like a sampler plate, an idea that has been made once, but only sort of as a first iteration. Anyway, we need to know whether you're a Bonapartist or a legitimist. Oh. None of the above. I guess legitimist, whatever. I think the House of Bourbon got a bad name. But anyway, I am going to call it here, guys. I am kind of getting a little dehydrated, and I've been talking for quite a while. So as soon as I can figure out how to get back to the control panel, I'll say goodnight, maybe answer a few last questions. Oh, here it is. Okay, let's answer a few last questions, and then we'll any last parting questions before I sign off? Cyberpunk 2077 is something that, I mean, I like the idea of it. I don't like sandbox games because I like games to be like movies, like they have a beginning and an end. I don't want a game that's just gonna suck my life in, and like you just play this game and you know you're doing your own thing. That's not my thing. And it's not like I ever really play many AAA games that aren't. I mean, I play like online card games. That's kind of like my vice, you know. Oh, pre-start super chats. Well, yeah, didn't I already answer those though? I mean, I can do this right now. I'll just double check this to make sure I didn't miss anything. I mean, it's the same one of ThoughtSlime having the room temperature IQ. I mean, the thing with ThoughtSlime is it's not. He knows his shtick is that he's stupid, so you can't call him stupid. I mean, his whole shtick is that he's stupid. His whole shtick is that his leftist ideas are so obvious that even a stupid person would think them. And right-wing ideas are so obviously wrong that even a stupid person would understand that they're wrong. And if you don't agree with him, then you're stupid. That's his entire shtick. So, you know, pointing out that he has a room temperature IQ is not... I mean, it's just, he's called ThoughtSlime. He's embracing this, guys. You're not gonna. It's like calling when you walk into the label. You're not gonna get anywhere by criticizing him. But I think I answered all the super chats though. I'm just kind of reviewing them. Yeah, I think that's it, guys. Well, just to tell you, I intend to hop right back on the wagon and try to make either the democracy video or the Game of Thrones video. I'm looking forward to the democracy video a lot more because I've lost interest in Game of Thrones. I probably won't even make it about Game of Thrones, but make it about the golden age of television just generally. So I'll probably get that sometime next week. I'm so glad this stupid Ben Burgess video is over. I'm not doing Twitter Wars with him again either. But anyway, I'll see you guys all later. Thanks so much for tuning in. And yeah, I'll probably do a Just Dance sometime in the future. Thanks a lot. Ciao.